Welcome to the Select Board on the meeting of 2/24/22. We apologize for being late, but our executive session ran over. So I would like to have the town administrator read the agenda, please. For the
Good
open
evening,
session.
everybody. We'll first start off with the public comment if there is any. Nobody has reached out to me that they do have one. The first item is the consent agenda, which is the payroll warrant for the interim town administrator, draft minutes of January 13th and February 3rd, and meeting dates for the month of March. Item number 2 was a COVID update from the Board of Health. Item 3 is a continuation and review of draft warrant articles for FY22 annual town meeting, which would be to amend the open space subdivision, the citizens petition by Rebecca Honeywell, the release, right, title, and interest in and to a portion of Obed Lane, and then the Appendix A, the personnel admin plan, the review of the wording with Vicki Rellis from the Personnel Board. 3A is a discussion on funding sources for a paving assessment of Rockwood Street. 3B is an intermunicipal water and sewer update from Marion Nutra and George Morrow. Item number 4 is town meeting and town election discussion with Jackie Morris, our town clerk. Number 5 is consideration of dog license extension. That's Jackie Morris, town clerk. And number 6 is consideration of capital request for FY23. Engineering services for Maple and Washington Street with the planning board and DPW. Town buildings and facilities with Sean Colleen. Stormwater MS4 compliance with Sean Colleen. Equipment with Sean Colleen, roadway management with Sean, and tree removal with Sean Colleen. Breathing apparatus, Chief Ward for the fire department, and utility terrain vehicle, Chief Ward for the fire department. The police cruiser for police department. Item number 7 is Arpa funding presentation, Capital Strategic Solutions, and Jen Thompson is here to present her Arpa funds. Number 8 is review of the FY23 Select Board budget after changes that were made from the February 3rd Select Board meeting. Number 9 is consideration of routine business, Select Board updates, and interim town administrator. The board will then go into executive session for item number 3, which is contract negotiations with non-bargaining employment pursuant to Mass General Law, Chapter 38, Section 21A2 for the DPW director. And the board will return to open session to adjourn the evening. I do have an amendment to this, what I just read. I'd like the board to consider removing the open space subdivision plan by Rebecca Honeywell. She's coming to the March 10th meeting. And the police cruiser was already discussed when the chief was here for his budget, so we can remove that item.
Okay, approval as amended.
So I have a discussion piece here.
Sure.
I know we've discussed the schedule going forward many times, and I know what almost all of the members of the board would say about this, but I've been asked to attend an annual town meeting that's going to take place on May 19th, which is a Thursday, but that's the first night of that town meeting. And I don't like missing select board meetings. If you look back over the last couple of decades, there's been very few that I miss. And I don't want to miss the May 19th meeting. There's like 400 people who are going to be there on May 19th. for that town meeting versus the 5 of us on May 19th. So I'm wondering if there's any appetite at all to take that item off the schedule or do it a week earlier on May 12th or a week later on May, whatever that Thursday is, 26th.
Well, I don't know. Do we need to consider that now? We don't know enough
I
about.
think it's premature to decide, but I also think that's the reason. I mean, Eric's not here tonight. I missed that Saturday meeting. We have a 5-member board. I think we've talked about keeping it consistent, that we have meetings every other week. And I think it's important that we keep that consistency. And unless, maybe by May 19th, Paul, we'll see that, that's right after town meeting. We may not have that busy of an agenda, and we may not even, I know sometimes that time of year we could skip a meeting or something, or have a very light agenda. So I know we've talked in the past about trying to keep our consistent schedule, and that's one of the beauties of having a 5-member board. If 4 of us are here, we can still conduct business, even 3 of us.
Yeah,
So
I'm not opposed to rescheduling if we need to, but I sort of agree with George that let's see as we get closer, because it also then we could conflict with some other meeting. If we keep changing ours, then they can't, it's very hard for other meetings to avoid us if we keep moving.
Right, exactly, because we've been asking them to avoid ours, but we got to stay a consistent schedule in order for that to be possible.
But I'm not opposed to considering it, Paul. I think, let's see, that's 3 months from now.
Well, but here's the thing, I have to commit, and I asked that town to wait until Friday morning because we're having a meeting and I was going to ask the board this question. I have to commit yes or no. If I say yes, they will go forward and schedule a town meeting, and there's a lot of procedures, there's the warrant, there's all this stuff. That date's gonna be locked in. So if I say no, then they're gonna try and figure out another date. So
No, I think we can
it's not
accommodate it
premature from that
for them.
perspective.
I understand, but from our
We
perspective,
can't make our schedules around other towns, so it's up to you, Paul. I mean, that's that, sorry.
but I think what we could do is, as George said, we could have 4 of us meet, and we could also, if there's 1 or 2 items that you really want to participate in, we could delay 1 or 2 items to another meeting if we didn't schedule the whole meeting. So I think you should accept it. This is my personal recommendation, not the board's, and we'll work to accommodate it so that you can participate in certainly the agenda items that you feel that you really would like to be involved in. There may be some lesser ones that you would be okay missing.
I
Is that-
agree with Jeff. I would keep our meeting on the 19th, but make sure that if there's anything on the agenda that is crucial, that Paul be there, and Paul feels strongly about, we could make sure we take care of those at another meeting so that Paul can be there.
That makes sense to me.
All right, so I have one other item. I want to ask for an agenda item, probably not at this meeting, but at some point really soon, about the flooding that's going on with the aircom work being done and so on, in public or in executive session. But property owners are being affected by water. Things gone on for a while. I think we got to bring this to a head and reach a action plan and get something done on this. So I'm requesting that we have an agenda item soon, very soon.
This is, you don't mean AirCom, you mean AECom, right?
AECom, yeah.
AECom?
AECom, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I agree with that. We considered an additional tranche of AECom work last time, and it wasn't clear to me that is absolutely necessary to get a final solution. They've already presented 2 alternative solutions. And I agree with Paul. I think we need to move more quickly on this.
Okay,
Maybe
so we can,
We have
We'll
to
have
be
to
careful with, because I know this, this involves some potential litigation, so just be careful what's discussed in open session in this.
Yeah, exactly.
But the point is that there's at least one property owner whose basement's getting flooded regularly, and
I
You
agree
said-
with you. I 100% agree with you, Paul. I just wanted to point out the fact that most of the time we're discussing this stuff, it's been an executive session.
Yeah, George, I sort of forgot that, sorry.
yes, and that leads to a second suggestion, that where you have members of the public being affected by things that are being discussed by us, for them to see that we're having all these meetings and not know anything, and not getting any reports, and not getting even a statement that we're working on it, is not the best way to treat the public, in my view. So that while we're working on this, I understand this threat of litigation and everything else, and that justifies an executive session. But complete silence is not recommended, and would want to see more public communication to the affected property owners so that they have an idea of what's going on.
I agree with you, Paul. That makes sense.
Agree.
Let's discuss it with our council and figure out what we can and can't say, and let's put it on our agenda for next meeting. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Maybe we put it on our agenda as executive session at 6:30, and then we could sort of agree there what we would then say in open session. So it could be in both,
That
Have a-
makes sense, Jeff.
agenda item in both, but we could discuss with council beforehand. Does that make sense, Paul?
Absolutely.
That sounds
Okay.
good.
All right, so thanks for bringing, I think it's a very good point, Paul.
Yeah.
Thanks for bringing that up. So we have a motion from George to accept the agenda as amended by the two items of removing the citizens petition on open space subdivision and removing the police cruiser. So with those adjustments, do I have a second for approving the agenda?
Second. Oh, I already approved. You made the motion.
You made the motion. I
Second
need a
my own.
second.
I'll second it, George.
All right, Marion,
Aye.
Paul,
Aye.
George?
Aye.
And I am I as well. So the agenda is approved. Do I have a motion on the consent agenda?
I move we accept the consent agenda as presented.
Second?
Second.
Okay, Marion,
Aye.
Paul,
Aye.
George,
Aye.
and I am I as well. Approved consent agenda. So we're on to COVID update, and I don't know if Daryl's on here or if they're planning something, or if Zach's on here. So let me look and see. Do you see them, Diane?
Daryl was here earlier, and I thought I saw Matt Vitale too.
And Daryl's on here.
I'm
wanna-
here. Here
Hello.
she is.
Do you want to update us on anything on the COVID?
Sure. Okay, I'm going to share a screen.
Oh, good.
I
just got-
presume you're seeing a graph.
This is Matt's data from today.
Yes.
Perfect.
So I think everyone gets the gist of what's been going on recently. There are lots more charts, but this one pretty much tells the story, and they all look similar. Just different metrics. So pretty much in reaction, as we've mentioned, the Board of Health keeps track of data and trends and what's going on. And at our last meeting, there was a 3-2 vote to recommend to the town to follow the Department of Public Health, State Department of Public Health requirements regarding masking. And so on the Sherborn MA webpage under the COVID banner, there is now a link that one can use to go refer to that guidance, because it has some if-then clauses, but the general idea is if you are vaccinated, that masks are not mandatory under certain circumstances. And I think it's worth going and looking at that to see the details that are in the document. There's still places such as medical offices where masking indoors is required. The Board of Health still advises that people wear masks indoors. But this reduction is really in response, reduction in requirements is in response to the declining numbers. That doesn't mean that the virus is still not present. We've had low levels in the past, and relaxation of behaviors does sometimes lead to an increase again. And I'm assuming most people have heard about the new version of Omicron BA.2 that is gaining some traction here. It's unclear yet if it's going to take off to the extent that it has in Europe, but it's more infectious than the prior Omicron that's been prevalent. And but there is not yet evidence that it's any more severe if you are vaccinated. So I think we'd like to encourage people, though, to, even though the requirements have changed, to be considerate when you're in spaces, particularly when you're going into areas where people who need to work in spaces that are very busy, such as grocery stores, are exposed to hundreds of people a day. And so it would be a nice gesture to help protect them by wearing masks in such places. And that's it, unless there are questions.
Daryl, I have a question. The vote of the board was 3-2. That's not exactly an overwhelming vote. Can you tell me what the dissenting opinions were?
I was one of the dissenting opinions because I do still think that masks are an effective, straightforward, not exceedingly difficult measure to take for the purposes of protecting others. And that was, I think, basically what the issue was for the two who dissented.
Right, thanks.
But we will remain, as always, tracking the data, and we'll be ready to pivot if things should change in a direction that's not helpful for, in particular, keeping the schools open.
Are there any other questions from the board?
But just a comment that following the advice doesn't mean that people can't choose to wear masks if they're uncomfortable being unmasked. So
Yes.
it's not the end of the mask. It's a decision to leave it up to people who presumably are intelligent enough to figure out when is a good time to wear a mask and when isn't a good time to wear a mask, or whether to wear a mask at all. Those are, they're essentially leaving it up to people. And if people want to wear masks, we should respect that and treat the mask wearer as the same as we would treat anybody else.
Yes, and we are fortunate in Sherborn to, I think a lot of us had the luxury of not being in crowded spaces. The schools, school children, that's different. They're probably one of the more crowded and consistent exposure to lots of people during the day, but not everyone has that option. So we've done pretty well in Sherborn, and I hope that continues. But again, we have seen that these relaxations do lead to kind of a roller coaster pattern. So that's part of what the dissent was about.
And I think one other point is that, you know, if you're aware of people that are immunosuppressed or have reasons which they may not have fully benefited from vaccination, you know, that's a good reason to be more careful when you're around them also. So are there any other updates on that, Daryl?
No.
I don't see any other hands raised, so I think we'll move on to item number 3 on the agenda, which is the continuation of draft warrant articles. And the one we're talking about first is the release, the right, title, and interest in a portion of Obed Lane. I'm not sure who's presenting on this one, Diane.
I think, Sean, are you here to talk on that? What happened to
not.
Sean? Why not?
I know where it is, though.
We discussed it once before, and I think
We
there was a
did.
question. There's a question that came up, and I honestly can't remember the question.
I
Well,
think
we
the
wait
board
for
was-
Jeannie to unmute. I believe in your packet you have.
We have the map And we have,
Yeah, we received a letter, I think, too, from Concom.
There she
Yeah,
is.
there I
the
am.
que-
There
The
you
question was left over from last week's meeting was coming from Eric. Did we own the land? So if we release the easement, we still own the land?
Yes,
Or do we not own the land? At which point, if we release the easement, the land would then go to the underlying fee owner, which is the person who's asking for us to release the easement. And so-
It is, I'm sorry, Paul. I asked Amanda that question and she said it was an easement. And in what I sent to you today was her reply. So-
Amanda's reply? I saw a title report. I didn't see Amanda's reply.
It was her email. Let me see if I can find it.
I didn't see it either. I saw a letter from
Me neither.
Concom, I think.
I sent it this afternoon at 3 o'clock.
That's the problem.
What did it say, Jeannie?
It
Essentially.
basically
Okay.
said, "Hi Jeannie, in response to Mr. Durensis' question, it appears from the correspondence attached that the town holds a right of way, an easement interest in so much of Ovid Lane as it lies to the north of Lake Street."
So it's an easement, not an
It's
ownership.
Right.
Yeah, there was a title report I saw, and that's what the title report said.
Okay. Can I share my screen for a second
Sure, go ahead.
about this? I just want people to be able to see why we might have considered retaining this easement on Obed Lane. And I'm not saying that I would vote to retain it, but I think that what we've seen so far doesn't really explain why that easement might have been there. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, here's Lake Street, right? Here's Morse Road. Over here is town land. Up here is town land, and this is town land here. So the easement goes up the side of this parcel numbered 45. And according to the easement doc, it stops about here. But what's interesting is that the shape of the lot continues over all the way to Morse Road, and then is adjacent to town land, which connects directly to the Price Woodlands. So is that correct, Jeannie?
No, Marilyn, it does continue back, but it hooks up to another piece of private property, that lot 47E, which is on
Yeah.
Morse Road,
Yes, that's what I said. It hooks up to 47E right here.
but that's
Oh.
private property.
Yeah, it is private property. That's right. So the point I'm making is only that this could have been envisioned as a way to get from town land to town land back in the day. One would have to have an easement that went on 44 to get to the town land right here. But just to show you that it's actually quite a short route that would allow that connection between the town of Sherborn land and the Bay Circuit Trail and the trails of Price Woodland. And I'm not saying that we should fight this, because actually you'd have to go, right through some private property, and getting an easement through private property is very difficult. But I'm just wanted to point that out to see to understand what the thinking might have been at the time.
If I can just 1 second, I live at lot 46,
Oh, okay.
and I think what it was is at one time, the same people owned my lot, all of Morse Road, and this whole area, and what is Price Woodlands was also private property. And I think at one point, the easement was kind of like a cart path that gave people access through the woods. And I'm not sure now that it's been subdivided, I think the easement the reason for the easement went away.
I think you're probably right, Janie. It also could have been an emergency exit for this dead end, which is actually longer than is allowed these days. Maybe it was at the time. But anyway, I won't speculate further. I just wanted to throw out that thought. Sorry, Jeannie, I didn't mean to try to take over your neighborhood.
No, you can take over my neighborhood. I got my own little lot.
You gotta mow her lawn though, if you're gonna do it.
And it's
So-
a pain.
Is there any other board discussion on this award article?
Well, what Marion said suggests that if we ever were going to do a public water supply well at Price Woodlands, we would need to have ways of piping water from there to various points in the town. And if we've got one spoke of that wheel or close to one spoke of that wheel, that raises the question of whether we should bank this for future use.
I think the plan was to come down Morse Road with that, Paul.
Yeah, and Price Woodlands connects to Lake Street over at the other end, doesn't it?
Right.
That's
So you
right.
can
there is a
go through
connection
people's
to that.
private property and use an easement.
Okay,
Yeah, I think that's true, and we don't have an easement on that 47 lot either, so it's or you know.
Right.
So-
I'm just
so-
always, dreaming about connections between open spaces.
Does anyone want to make a motion on this article?
I guess move to support.
Okay, is there a second?
Second,
Marion,
Aye.
Paul,
Aye.
George,
aye.
and I am I as well. The next item is Vicky Relis talking about a personal administration plan. I think we talked about it and she was making some amendments. Is Vicky here?
Hi, yes, I'm
He is,
here.
yeah.
Hi, Vicky.
Hi.
Vicky.
So what we did, hi, everyone. I have to tell you, every time you go for roll call, I'm waiting for you to say Ringo, but this is. Anyway, so what we were talking about, Article 24, amend Personnel Administration Plan Appendix A. The way that it states now is to see if the town will vote to amend Personnel Administration Plan Section 1, Paragraph H of the general bylaws by deleting the paragraph as amended from time to time by the Personnel Board, such that Paragraph H reads as follows. Additions are shown in bold and deletions are shown in the strike-through font. Okay. Job clarification plan shall mean Appendix A to this plan. We're going to take out as amended from time to time by the Personnel Board, and we're going to put by allowing the town administrator to maintain an updated job classification Appendix A with the consent of the Personnel Board, or to take any other action relative thereto. So basically, we're taking out the wording that says as amended from time to time by the Personnel Board, and we're in its place as amended from time to time by the town administrator with the consent of the Personnel Board. And that's it. We're not saying, I think the discussion last was maybe we were trying to give more, more attention to the actual jobs to the town administrator, but that's not it. It's just classifying the job title.
Anybody
Is
have
everybody okay with that?
any questions on that?
If this is something that the Personnel Board has voted to support, and I hope that's the case,
Yes.
then I would follow their leadership and go with them because they're the ones who are working hard on understanding and implementing the personnel bylaw. And if they feel this works for them, then it works for me.
So I'll take that as a motion, Paul.
Okay.
Backhanded one.
Thank you, Paul.
Is there a second, Marion?
I second. Or,
No, just vote, Marion.
okay, aye.
Paul,
Aye.
George,
Aye.
and I am I as well. Thanks very much, Vicky.
Super. Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Yep.
Vicky.
So now we're going to go to item 3A, which is discussion of funding sources for a paving assessment of Rockwood Street. Who's presenting on that, Diane?
Jeff, that was actually a request to be put on there by Eric, asked me to put that on there. So with him not here tonight, I don't know if we're gonna want to move that until
Yes.
the next meeting.
No. So if
No?
I could,
Okay.
you all voted not to support the article. I voted against not supporting that article about paving.
Just to
the
be clear,
street.
Paul, I was not there. I did not vote on this.
Yeah, and the article was to pave it. I think it wasn't an article to do a study, I don't think.
Right, but I was going to suggest either adding another article to the warrant or to, in the motion from advisory, to have advisory move to put some money aside to investigate and come back with a recommendation at the next town meeting, is where I would head with this article. But the vote was taken, it was 3-1, I guess. I voted to not to oppose the article that way. And so the alternative that I think that leaves us, if we're not supporting the article and therefore not supporting any funding from town meeting, is to use ARPA funds, put aside some ARPA funds and have at least some analysis done of what would be involved here to pave the road and do the drainage and whatever else needs to be done. So I'm in favor then, since the other options appear to be foreclosed, to doing something here. And that means the only thing available to us without a town meeting vote is the ARPA funds. So I would propose using ARPA as a source of funds.
I guess that I would say, well, Sean has his hand up, but I would say that that's not completely true. We could always do a reserve fund transfer too. You know,
That's for unforeseen things. This is
well,
perfectly foreseeable.
I'm not sure it was foreseeable that the conditions would get as bad as they have with climate change. I mean, you could make a case for it, but I don't know that we need to decide the funding source right now, is guess what I'm saying.
Right, and on that note, we have an agenda item later in the meeting about ARPA funding. And we've talked about, you know, every time something comes up, there's a discussion about spending ARPA fund here, under ARPA funds there. I would wait till we actually have a discussion about the actual ARPA funds and our direction in general before we commit them to any projects.
I agree, but on the other hand, I think the sense of the discussion last time was not that we're against paving Rockwood Street. It's just we're against committing a town meeting vote to paving it and committing the amounts of money that we have no idea what it's going to be. But we do, so I voted no last time to that proposal, to this citizen's petition, but it seemed to me that this is a good step forward, because eventually we do support our neighbors on Rockwood Street and realize that they need to have it paved. So the question is where the money's going to come from. And I agree with George. I would rather we not commit ARPA funds at this point, because we're about to formulate a strategy to use ARPA funds in a sort of rational, organized way, rather than bit by bit. So if we have another source of funding, like reserve fund transfer or something, we should, or free cash, not cash and not free, we should do that.
I want to bring up one other thing. I wasn't there on Saturday. I apologize for missing that meeting when this was discussed, but the other thing, I've had a citizen reach out to me from Green Lane as well. And it's a discussion I've had with Sean in the past of how much money is spent each year on these dirt roads for maintenance versus paving. I mean, I don't think it's a discussion of just Rockwood. If we were looking at, if we're looking at these roads, like what is the, you know, look at a cost benefit analysis of paving versus the maintenance. I've talked to Sean about that in the past. Is it something we should look at or not?
Yeah, we don't have any data really is what you're saying too, to what it would cost and what.
Yeah, how
would
much does
be-
Sean spend per year
Yeah.
on Green Lane and on
Yeah.
Rockwood? Those are the two dirt roads that come to mind. There may be more in
Yeah.
town. Those are the
Well,
two.
there are also people that live on those roads that don't want them paved, at least on
Right,
Green
no,
Lane-
I know.
Green
I
Lane.
know. I
because they
saw
don't want-
Courtney Eck already put
Yeah.
that. But one of her neighbors has contacted me multiple times about can the town research getting
Yeah.
that paved. So
Yeah, so we need to
opinions
assess
on
it.
the same
So I
road.
guess Sean, did you want to add anything on this or do you,
Well, yeah, I had a little, possibly a different take on the tone of the meeting the other day, and I suspect I thought the direction I got, and maybe it was Eric pushing more, was to try to come back, at least with a general scope of what we might need for engineering. Because again, I think I was asked before, and I could, the scope of what it's going to cost to pave, we already have we have contracts with people. We could measure that road and tell you exactly what it's going to cost to pave it. The engineering is a little bit more foggy. So between then and tonight, I did some poking around as far as what we think we're going to have to permit. It's not in the MS4 area. There is wetlands nearby. So there's some wetland engineering that's going to have to be done. Probably a notice of intent. Certainly some topo for the drainage. We don't need to engineer the whole road. The road exists now. The take from the engineer I talked to was although it's probably just over an acre that's getting paved, it's not being developed. It's already developed. It just happens to be gravel instead of dirt. So it's not an onerous amount of work on the engineering side for permitting, for stormwater. So I thought we were headed towards using some kind of funds we already have, or the board discussing that, so that, maybe in the near future, we have some engineering estimates on what the actual construction would cost for a future article.
That's
So-
exactly my recollection, Sean.
Right. So
I think that's what
the
happened.
best guess we have, of course, you need an engineer usually to tell you what the engineer is going to cost. But I would think that we probably need to spend 15 or 20,000 to have the permitting done and the plans to be able to build it. Or at least biddable documents.
does anyone else on the board want to add anything?
No, but I'm saying if we're gonna do something, and if it's 15 to 20,000, and we have an agenda item so that we can actually do something on it, I think we should try to help our neighbors. And they're being washed out. They don't have good access. It's dangerous for them. They pay taxes like we all do. We should be, just a sense of, for me, is that we ought to have more of a community and more concern about each other. So I want to do something to help them.
Well, we need to figure out what it costs to do it, Paul. So John Hargrave has his friend. Do you have a point you want to make, John? A new point?
Yeah, so my recollection is the same as Director Colleen. So when we last met on the 12th, after some discussion, you guys asked Director Colleen to go back and take a look at it and see maybe what this would cost. And my recollection was the vote was withheld at that time until you kind of pushed it to today. So when was the vote taken?
We haven't taken a vote. We took a vote on paving the road. The warrant article that you created was paving the road.
Correct.
We voted against that. So this has nothing to do with the paving. This is an engineering study for the paving. It's
So to be
related, but this isn't really an article. It's just discussion on funding sources
Yep, yeah.
for doing this study. So I guess what I would recommend, and Paul's got his hand up, but Paul, do you want to add something to that?
Me?
Yeah, you had your hand up, or is that from before?
That's from before.
Oh, all right. So I interrupted you, John. Do you want to add anything else?
Yes, I do. So on the 12th, my recollection is there was no vote taken. The vote that we're talking about, to be clear, is whether the board is going to support the warrant article as it stands. So
No, that's not true. We voted on that.
Yeah, that was voted down 3-1.
That was voted down.
So you have voted against that. And the question is, in the summary of the write-up, are you going to say something else that could at least help move this forward? Because otherwise,
We don't do the write-up. That's advisory, John.
Advisory does the write-up, and the write-up is on the warrant article.
forgive me. So the question is, are we going to do something to move this forward? Because
What we're
right now,
doing right now is maybe you're having trouble with the agenda. The agenda says we're discussing funding sources for a paving assessment. That's what we're discussing right now. We're not discussing any warrant articles right now.
but the warrant article will still go before town meeting as it is, just simply without your approval, correct?
If you decide to not withdraw it, that's true.
And again, if that is then voted on by the town of Sherborn, where does that leave us as a town? Knowing now we have a warrant article to pave Rockwood Street, but we don't have any estimates of its cost. What kind of position will that put all of us in? Because obviously we want to help this succeed and help this happen.
We'll take that bridge when we come to it, I'd say.
Is that the best approach?
I think so.
Jeff,
Marion, do you want to have another point?
I do. It seems to me that I recall from last meeting, we did talk about putting forth another warrant article on the warrant, proposing a sum for engineering study of Rockwood Street. In order to get that, an article of support on the warrant with funding. And
Well, we can certainly do that, but that's not necessary to come up with $15,000 or $20,000. It seems kind of silly to me to do that, but
the advantage of doing it that way, maybe that's not an advantage, maybe it would just take longer and be more complicated, but it does make a statement at town meeting that we can't support the article as written, but that we do support the needs of the people on Rockwood Street.
So this is a discussion we had last time, and I agree with Marion, but that's why here I'm saying, given the fact that there was no support for the article, there could be a motion for advisory to do a lesser included motion to appropriate money to study this. But
advisory doesn't make motions, Paul. Advisory reviews the warrant article and reviews every town budget.
they make a motion at town meeting.
Yes, but their motions are what's in the warrant, which is the operating budget, the capital budget, and the other items that are on the warrant. They don't create warrant articles.
Right, but they could make a motion under this article for a lesser included, saying we recommend that money be appropriated to study this and put a sum in and a funding source. They could go that route.
They can make a motion at town meeting. Yes, once we voted on the warrant, it's the article that's written as written.
It'll first be voted as written, as Jeff's saying, but then it doesn't even have to be advisory. It could be a citizen could make a alternative motion.
Yeah, it could be a select board member.
Yeah. I mean,
So here's what I would recommend. I don't mean to cut things short, but we have a full agenda. My suggestion is, because I know that Eric wanted to participate in this and his expertise happens to be really relevant to this also. Probably more so than other than Sean, maybe anyone in town relative to engineering for roads. So I would recommend, and since Paul suggested ARPA funds, but we haven't gotten to the ARPA section yet, I would recommend with board's question for your support that we put this agenda item on the 2 weeks from now agenda again to discuss it. And we'll at that point have Eric participating and we'll know kind of what the ARPA process is going to look like.
I completely agree with you, Jeff. I think I'm not against spending money on this. Or I don't know yet, but I do want to have that ARPA discussion before we vote on any more ARPA funds.
Yep.
I think you're completely right, Jeff. And I want to hear Eric's opinion on this. So I think it's appropriate to delay this for 2 weeks.
Paul and Marion, are you okay with that?
Right. I still would like to see it on the town meeting agenda as either a motion from the floor, an amendment from the floor, or in some form, you guys decide what's legal, in order to express support for the long-term for paving on Rockwood Street, even though we cannot support the article, the citizens petition as written.
I agree with Marion.
Well, I mean, the problem with what you're saying is that the support for the road, we need to know how much it costs. And so we won't
Right.
have the results of the study. So we can't support something if we don't know what it costs. I don't see how we can.
But we can make
do
a,
that.
we can make a ballpark. We've
That's
done
what the
that.
engineering assessment is designed to do.
I mean, a ballpark for the engineering assessment, not the cost of.
Oh, okay. I misunderstood what you're saying. For the
Yeah.
paving, we wouldn't be able to, but we, like I said, if that's what people want to do, but we could just do this in this year's budget with a reserve fund transfer, I believe, and Paul can challenge that on whether it's an emergency or not. The advantage of that is you could start doing it, in April instead of in July, but that's up to,
I withdraw the objection to a reserve fund transfer.
okay.
I think we need to do something for these people. As I say, they're taxpayers. They've made, I think,
Yeah.
a persuasive case that there have been weather events that causes now for them to have to endure things that other people in town are not enduring. And we, as a larger community, should care for one another enough to do something to help them.
Okay. Did you have something additional, different than what you've already said, John, to add?
Yep, two questions. Number one, 15 to 20K is what I heard Director Colleen say that we might spend to get the engineering assessment. Could that be budgeted now and in process so we have something, we do know what the actual cost of this is?
We won't know in time for town meeting, but we would probably could cause the assessment. We would have to see how long it would take. Engineering firms and construction firms right now are swamped all over the state. So,
And so is our road. So
well,
15
yeah,
it literally is a swamp.
Yep.
15 to 20K though would be the price we think to at least get the estimate. And would
We
there
don't-
be for that, or is that the ARPA fund that we're talking about?
none of the above. We need to find out what the study is going to cost, and we don't know whether we're going to use ARPA funding or not.
Okay, but we think, according to Director Kling, somewhere in the 15 to 20K range might get us at least to a price tag for getting the road.
We'll
An engineering study. Yeah.
We'll find that out. I would be surprised if that's all it costs, but let's get Eric's expertise. That's Eric's, the city engineer for Framingham. So
Yep,
that's
and
why.
second, I'm sorry to interrupt. Second question, would you please come visit Rockwood Street? Would you all please come drive down from the length from 27 all the way down to Douse Orchard and back? Please just do that before our next meeting.
I will.
Thank
Try
you.
it tomorrow morning.
Almost.
Can I just add one?
Not tomorrow morning, but
That's fine. Please don't.
I
will.
John will, yeah.
So
All right.
one little.
Thanks for your input, John. Go ahead,
One little
Paul.
fact trivia is that if we did use ARPA funds, once the board votes it, there's no other approvals necessary, and we could go get the engineering study done, and maybe we'd have a number for town meeting. But if we don't vote something soon, town meeting is coming on at the end of April right now. We do have an agenda item here to talk about the dates of town meeting, but the end of April, so we're looking at essentially 2 months out. And it's very unlikely, if we don't find some funds now, that we could have enough information to actually consider appropriation of funds to actually pave the road.
Oh, I don't think that's realistic. There's no way an engineering study would be done by April. Is that correct, Sean?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, it's on your agenda. You could vote right now to just direct me to use my budget funds to do it, but I can, there's no chance you're gonna get a real engineering study done before town meeting. Someone can take a pretty decent look at it, but I don't have an engineer I can call tomorrow and have him start working on it. And
Backlog in
it
today's-
probably needs to go in front of conservation, and if I told, I'll probably get a note pop up on the screen in a second. If I say, what's the likelihood we could get into conservation and get a review on a notice of intent in the next 30 days before town meeting? I don't think it would happen.
We refer to it as paving, but the paving would probably be about, who knows, 30% of the cost. The water, culverts and all the water diversion and all the other considerations are going to be expensive. I can tell you that as a civil engineer.
Yeah, I think the timing is not, Paul, you think there is 2 months between now and town meeting, but there's no way an engineering study would be done in that time based on the current environment of how backlogged engineers are, unfortunately.
That, and I got a few things to do between now and town meeting, so I can't really start it tomorrow.
Right.
I'm more than happy to get going on it, but I don't think we can commit to that. I think it's valuable to be doing. I don't think we're going to town meeting asking for money. It's also going to be in line behind 5 or 6 other things I have later in the agenda.
Yeah, we're getting to it. Don't worry. So I would like to stick with my recommendation then that we wait for Eric and see if we discuss this and put it on the agenda, please, Diane, in 2 weeks, and Eric can weigh in on with his expertise also. And he probably has engineers that he could recommend as well.
Makes sense.
Thanks, Sean. All right, let's move on to the next item, which is Marion and George talking about the intermunicipal water and sewer update.
I'll defer to Marion. Go ahead, Marion.
Oh, right, yeah, I volunteered to take the hit this time. George, help me if I get off base, but for the general public, I just want to say briefly that this is all about the 2 projects on Coolidge Street. One is a age-restricted project that was going to be built by Pulte, big developer. And the other was a friendly 40B to be built by Baystone, another developer. Both of those projects, I should say the Baystone project in particular is really important to the town because it's affordable housing, it's rental. It would have gotten us over our 10% mandated affordable housing threshold for the state. But both of those projects were almost all approved. The Pulte project had a preliminary plan approved. The Baystone project had just 1 or 2 steps with Concom before it received final approval. But both projects were pending negotiation of water supply from Framingham via MWRA and sewer outlet through Natick. Without those, such big projects couldn't happen. So both of them require intermunicipal agreements with Natick and Framingham. The negotiations for those intermunicipal agreements, I'll call them IMAs, probably shouldn't have been, but they were left to Pulte, the developer, alone to negotiate with a representative of former Sherborn Town Council from KP Law. The last update we got from Town Council, from KP Law, I should say, was that the Framingham negotiations were going very well, and the Natick negotiations were going pretty well, but had some issues. So we didn't hear anything for several months. We followed up with the Sherborn, with the KP Law Town Council, asked him to get after Pulte and find out where they stood. He did, got no response for some time. Eventually, we heard through Baystone that Pulte was withdrawing their project altogether. And eventually we heard from Pulte directly, but only several weeks later. And the Baystone project, the 40B, which was the most important part, after a lot of deliberation, decided to withdraw their project because without the Pulte piece, without the other part of the project, And without the IMAs in place and without all the MWRA approval that they needed, it was just too much. So they still, though, are almost approved by the town and could be picked up by other developers. That's a possibility. If they were, it would be good for the town for sure. So George Morrill and I decided to explore the future possibility of IMAs with Natick and Framingham, this time going directly to Natick and Framingham officials, not going through either developer or any developer. And so we
Or
have
to add to that, Marion, or our town council, because we've had an issue with our town council not returning emails and not getting back to us. So Marion and I decided to take the lead ourselves to reach out to town officials.
yes, thanks for that.
Let me just clarify that you don't mean Petrini, because we were
No,
using.
no. Petrini had to recuse themselves because
Yeah.
they represent Framingham.
No, I
They
know
can't be
that,
involved.
but I wanted to have the meeting reflect the fact that we had to use a different town council. So it wasn't our
Correct.
current town council that wasn't
We
responding.
had to
That's all.
use a member from KP Law. That's right.
Right.
It would
Yes.
not have been our first choice, but that was what was decided.
Correct.
Like it's
Yeah.
now, almost 5 years ago.
Yes.
So-
No, I understand. I just want to make sure that the record,
Yeah.
was reflective of that.
Thank you both. So we have reached out, I to Natick, George to Framingham, and asked for direct meetings just to understand where the negotiations stand, to see if there are outstanding issues that could be resolved, and to try to get at least draft intermunicipal agreements in place to be ready if a developer picks up either or both of these projects. Because without it, a developer is unlikely to pick up both of these projects. It turns out that through the Framingham Council, who is from Petrini, we have learned that the negotiations with Framingham were as well as done. I mean, it went
Mhm.
really well.
Mhm.
With Natick, there were problems concerning the cost to the towns, et cetera, but it sounds to us as if that door is not by any means closed. In fact, they had a draft IMA that hadn't been agreed yet. So this is just an update to tell you that the Natick response is very positive to this. And that's the crucial one. Framingham, I don't think, George, we haven't heard from Framingham yet.
No, I'm gonna talk to Amanda Zaretti, our counsel at Petrini, who knows the right person to set up a meeting for us with them. And Amanda will I reached out to one person in Framingham and he said to reach out to the mayor's office. So Amanda would put me in touch with the right person, I think.
Right. So anyway, we're on the road to getting at least the process for these IMAs in place. And the initial discussion we were planning to do without town council. We're not happy with the council that we had on that project. We cannot use Petrini. But we have not talked to KP Law about this, so perhaps this isn't a public meeting appropriate thing, but we need to discuss how to proceed with town council.
Right.
With a council.
And just to add to what Marion said, I think the strategy here is I've talked to, since I work in the real estate world and know a lot of developers, and I know the guys from Baystone and that, I don't think the project is, just because Baystone walked away, it's not dead. Baystone has gotten far with approvals. It's a viable project. And I think if we as a town negotiate these IMAs without developers in their pocketbooks being tempted, but I think that's really the problem. I'm going to put it out there is that, when a developer goes to Natick, they're like, oh, great, let's put sidewalks on Speen Street and let's do this and let's do that. So the costs skyrocket. But if we want to do it as a town to negotiate these IMAs, and that's going to make it, if we have that process complete, it's going to be a much more viable project for a developer to come in and step into Baystone's shoes, and Baystone could sell their plans and their approvals to another developer who could could walk right into it and move this forward, which I think would be good for everybody. So I think Marion and I really are going to continue down this path of getting these IMAs negotiated so they're in place, and we can then be that much further ahead when we're ready to move forward with another developer. I think the challenge right now is who we're going to use for our council, because we're not happy with who we have and we can't use Petrini.
Right, but Chris Petrini has recommended another council that he thinks would be excellent. And, you know, he did that in an objective way.
Yep. Paul, do you have something to add here on the council's part?
He's had his hand up.
Not on the council part, but I have a comment that I want to make, a question really. When it's appropriate to ask questions. I don't have a comment on the council part.
No, go ahead, Paul.
Well, why don't we address the council part first? Because what would we need to do though, Paul, if we wanted to switch councils for this? Can we just engage with the one
Yeah.
recommended?
Yeah, the council is exempt from procurement. It's
So
They
We don't have any agreement with KP Law on this. We can, if we decide we don't want to use them anymore, we can move on to somebody else.
Yes.
Yeah,
I asked
we-
Diane to look into the records and see if we have a contract with KP Law on this. But we
well,
may-
yes, we do, in that we have Rick Holland for the library.
Right, that's it.
We're
Right.
using Rick Holland. We agreed, I think, they weren't our weren't a retainer anymore, but we were using certain attorneys. I think we used a KP Law attorney for part of the police chief investigation, and I think we used a KP Law attorney for I know we're using Rick Holland. He was on executive session tonight, so we have a contract with them, but on a case-by-case basis, not a retained
Correct.
basis.
Right.
correct.
So I don't know if we need to take a vote, but I would encourage.
No, I don't
you
think we
to-
do. I think I would
Yeah.
hear what Paul's questions are. That would be great.
Yeah, but I would authorize you to get the attorney that you feel comfortable with, that
Okay.
answers phone calls also.
And returns emails.
So anyway, Paul, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Do you want to bring up your other point now?
Yes, so 2 points. The first is several times we said this is good for the town, and I just wanted to remind the voters, the viewers, the public, that the reason why it's good for the town is because there's a requirement under state law that we have at least 10% of our housing to be what they call affordable. We do not meet that, which means we're vulnerable to all kinds of projects, whether appropriate or inappropriate. This particular project that George and Marion are talking about would put us over the 10% and thus give us some protection from a project that might be at an inappropriate location or an inappropriate size. So that's why we're all saying it's good for the town. The second point is a request that both Marion and George consider the impact of an IMA on the following situation. Sherborn is an MBTA community, and therefore we're classified as an adjacent community under the new proposed regulations. That means under the new regulations, we're going to have to come up with 750 housing units that are going to be located in as close to the train station as possible, within a half mile of the train station. And it has to be like 50 acres at least in size and so on. The restriction on not having water and not having sewer may play a role in connection with that burden. I'm mindful of the fact that 750 dwelling units, when you look at the number of houses in town, I think it's like 1,400 houses, is a 50% increase in housing in Sherborn. And that to me might be community changing the whole characteristics of the community that we all love. So just asking you to consider that. And later on, when we talk about the warrant, we might consider a home rule petition to the legislature asking to exempt us from these rules, because this would be such a large increase on a community that's essentially a small community, that it is completely changing the character of the community and therefore inherently unfair for its overall impact. So we could ask the legislature to exempt us from that. We have not yet been able to convince the rule makers to create an exemption for small communities. So the same standards that apply to a big city will be applying to little old Sherborn. So that's a long-winded way of saying is, please consider as you go forward with these IMA negotiations, whether or not what impact that might have on this looming issue that we have to address as a community to provide this additional multifamily housing in town.
Well said, Paul. Thank you.
Yeah,
Mary-
thank you,
Ma-
Paul.
Marion, did you want to add to that? You had your hand up.
Well, yeah, just to add that I believe there's an alternative way that towns of a certain small size below, I see Addie Maison, she probably knows this top of her head. Is it below 7,000 residents, which we are, has an alternative way to calculate the MWRA community. Oh, and Chris is here, you would know this, Chris, too. That would require something like, I believe, a 10% increase. But still, that's a lot. That's 150 additional households rather than 750. There's Gino. He can explain it just better than I can. But if we didn't fulfill those requirements, we're not going to be put in jail or anything. We just will not have access to certain grants that we would like to have access to. But Gino should do this.
Yeah, let's
Yeah,
hear
the
Gino.
10% option, it's really not an option, it's both. Currently, the guidelines are in draft form and comments are due March 31st. And I believe we are scheduled to discuss this with you on the March 10th meeting. But right now, 750 is the minimum. The 10% is if you have more than 7,500 units, then you have to have 10%. So that's the way it's set up right now.
Worse than I thought.
Yes.
So you're drafting comments on it then, Gino? The collective,
Yes.
you?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
thank
it
you.
sounds like Gino's working on Paul's concern here that
Yeah.
to address the writers of this, that this should not apply to Sherborn.
Yes, but I'm urging both George and Marion, when you're looking at putting together this IMA, consider whether the availability of water and sewer in Sherborn, what impact that would have on an obligation to provide 750 housing
Right.
units.
I mean, that 750 housing units would be ridiculous. I mean, obviously nobody would want that. That would change our community completely. It would,
Well,
obviously nobody wants that for our town.
absolutely not. One limitation already, I think, in that bill is that in towns without water and sewer, the density would be limited by Title V. Of course, if we do have
Yes.
water and sewer, you no longer have that limitation.
But if the water and sewer, the IMAs were for water and sewer for a specific development, they're not water and sewer for the whole town. There's a difference between, we're not saying we're providing water and this IMA would not only be between the town, they would be also between the developer as well, because they're for private use, not for town use.
That's a good point.
I'll take it.
Okay, you need to mute yourself, Frank.
Yeah.
Or I'll mute you. I muted him. I think Beth's
Well,
talking to him.
There's a lot to keep in mind, and thanks, Paul.
Right, this
So I
was
don't-
just a heads up to keep that
Yeah,
in
no, I
mind.
appreciate the heads up, Paul. That's, it's important to keep in mind because that is a looming issue with these MBTA communities. So, thank you. But I think if there's any other questions, I think that's all Marion and I had. We just wanted to update you on what we were working on that front.
No, and I'm really glad that the two of you are following up on this, that, you know, because it really is important to our affordable housing plan to get to 10%. It keeps us away from 40B if we're on that plan also, as long as we're, you know, making annual progress.
Yeah.
So Frank, did you want to add anything?
You're muted, Frank.
You're,
No.
There you go.
Hello, yes. I want to just commend Marion and George for picking up on this so quickly and making the kind of contacts they did. This is something that we've needed to have done a long time ago. And I'm sorry that for some reason or other it got stalled along the way, but I'm glad Marion and George are picking up on it. I also want to make sure that whatever we do in getting this IMA finalized, that the Sherborn would not be the owner of the water and sewer facility, because that then would open up anyone to hook up to it once it became part of the project.
Yeah, no, we've been very clear when we've talked about this, that the water and sewer obviously is going to be owned by Natick. It's going to provide private service to these developments. So it's really, they're paying for it. Sherborn, the only thing we would allow was the access to the roads in order to get that installed.
Right.
And have it repaired during the time. They'd have to have access
Right.
ongoing. And then the other part of it is just because of the general chemical plume, part of it is going to be that there would be the emergency access for current residents of like Meadowbrook. So then if they end up getting contaminated from the general chemical plume, the stuff would be there for that neighborhood, which could be something they don't have now, which could help them in the future if God, you know, their wells do get contaminated by that general chemical plume.
Good, okay. That's it, Jeff.
two other points I was going to ask George and Marion. One is, I think Natick could be a little bit harder only because I think Framingham's a city, so it can approve it, whereas Natick would have to be it on their town meeting.
You're exactly
So
right.
that would give you, they'd, you know, obviously can't be their spring town meeting, so we would either have to try to encourage a special fall town meeting, or it would have to be a year from now.
I think they typically have 2 town meetings a year in Natick.
Do they?
Enough business that they typically have a fall town meeting every year.
Yeah.
That's right. Another piece of this is that Sherborn would have to set up a water district in order to clearly delineate from the town's point of view what is covered. So exactly who would be covered by this, or if there could be an emergency coverage, or how that would work, we have yet to figure out.
Yeah. The other thing, Steve Sy just posted a comment on the chat box that we are removing all these from the warrant this year, Steve. We're not going to have any warrant articles related to these IMAs or the water district or anything, just because it's too premature.
I might suggest you might want to look at a warrant article that would ask the legislature to exempt us from this MBTA community business.
That would be the only one, Paul. We hadn't even talked about that until tonight since you brought that up, but that is something definitely to consider.
And so we would open and close the warrant to do that? Is that what you're proposing? Paul?
Yeah, I think let me look into that.
Not suggesting that tonight. I think we ought to listen to
Yeah.
the presentation from the planning board,
Yeah.
see what they've come up with, see how the regulations get finalized. But it seemed like right now, it seems like that's the only way out of a really difficult situation.
Yeah. So that's kind of on the back burner, but I think the ones that we have placeholders for now are removed, Steve, so you don't have to worry about those from advisory standpoint, but there is a chance that there will be this other thing if need be. Jeff, I do see that John Hargrave has his hand up.
Yeah, one question before we get to that. So if we do want to add an article, we would do that before the advisory public hearing though, wouldn't we?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
probably do
definitely.
it 2 weeks from now.
Oh, that reminds me, if I could, on the consent agenda, there was, or in the packet, there was this town calendar. And part of the town calendar has us finalizing the warrant after the advisory committee hearing. And I've maintained for at least 20 years that we ought to finalize the warrant before the advisory committee hearing.
Absolutely.
Because what is the advisory having a hearing on? If we pull our articles off and we add articles on, and then they find they wasted the whole evening with stuff that's not going to town meeting. We need to change the schedule a bit so that the finalization of the warrant is before advisory.
Yes.
So it should be done in different order than what's in that schedule.
Yeah, George and I can agree because we used to have to write up the warrant articles usually within a day or two. So Diane, do you have a point you want to bring up on
I
this?
have, yes, I have you down on the March 10th meetings for a final review and hopefully, approval of the final town meeting warrant. I have you already plugged into my agenda for March 10th.
Perfect. I think that's what we need.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, John, did you have something on this article or this item?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you also to Marion and George for their work on this. As the major abutters on those two potential projects there, that was always our concern, with 750 additional units, all using the Sherborn water and sewer. We're just like, that is not going to work. Rather, we knew we needed, the Natick and Framingham water and sewer. So thank you guys for moving it forward.
Sounds good. All right, so let's move on to Jackie, who's talking about town meeting and town election discussion.
Hi, thank you, Jeff. Yeah, so I just felt it was really important that I have a formal discussion with the board about town meeting and let you guys know what your options are, because it was mentioned possibly moving it last time. So I wanted to let you know that the state of emergency has ended. So you have limited choices on what you can do in terms of moving town meeting. We have to go by the Sherborn bylaws right now. So we have to have town meeting the last half of April or the first week in May. So right now I do have Linquist Commons reserved on Thursday, April 26th, which is our normal day. If you guys wanted to move it, you would, I'm assuming it would be a Saturday. You'd only have a choice of April 30th or May 7th. I can tell you right now that Dover is having their meeting at Linquist Commons. They are scheduled for Monday, May 2nd, and then the clerk said that they normally go 2 nights, so probably Tuesday, May 3rd.
So just one point.
Yes.
I think last Saturday, Governor Baker signed a new law, Chapter 22, the Acts of 2022.
Mm-hmm.
And it has all these sections in there carrying forward a lot of his executive orders. That includes the open meeting law piece, the virtual meetings piece, but also includes town meeting pieces. So you may want to take a look at that.
I have the law, and the only thing that is open to us, because we're open town meeting, is you guys lowering the quorum. Everything else in there about town meeting is for representative town meeting, which they are allowing remote town meetings, but not for open town meetings. The only thing that's in there is lowering the quorum.
I think we should move forward with Linquist Commons. If the school's dropping their mask mandate as of March 7th, I think let's move forward. Let's get this back to normal. I think everybody needs to be back to normal. And town meeting at Linquist Commons makes the most sense. We don't need to spend the extra money on the DPW. I think let's move forward as scheduled.
Well, I guess to what she said, though, we could consider whether we change the quorum, because we do run a risk if we are there, say COVID, whatever it's called, B2 takes off, that we wouldn't have a quorum because people were concerned and didn't show
Right.
up.
You do not have to decide on the quorum right now, and I can't let you decide on the quorum because it has to be posted. Your vote, your planned vote to change the quorum has to be posted 7 days in advance.
Okay,
So we could talk about it, the end of March or the beginning of April. I cannot be on the March 10th meeting. I'm not available, and that's one reason why I wanted to talk tonight, because if you guys did change things, I've got to get things moving. But
so if we
I
do
would like to
nothing,
go back to April 26th at Lindquist Commons.
and if we do
possible.
nothing, Jackie, we'll be 100 at quorum, right? Is that our traditional?
Our
as
quorum
100?
is 100,
Yeah,
yes.
okay. Okay. That makes
So,
sense.
but you guys have plenty of time to lower the quorum, but like I said, the meeting, it has to be, I have to post it 7 days in advance, your vote, your planned vote.
Okay. And you'll just coordinate with Diane on when
Mhm.
you're available to do that.
Yeah.
Okay,
Mhm.
thank you.
You're
Marion,
welcome.
you had your hand up, Marion. Did you want to comment on this?
No, I don't need to say anything.
Okay,
Okay.
and then the only other thing is that for the election, which we really don't need to get into a heavy discussion right now, but that has to be on the second Tuesday in May. There's no changes. So
Okay.
the only things that you guys can do is change the location, but hopefully in May, we're set to go at Town Hall.
Okay,
So that was it. I just wanted to confirm that we were, gonna go forward with April 26th so I can start planning.
okay.
Do you guys
Sounds
want to
good.
vote or?
Do we need to vote on anything?
have we already voted to have the meeting on April 26th? I think we
I
have, right?
don't believe so, no, it's
No,
just
I'll make a motion that we
historically.
have our town meeting on April 26th at Lindquist Commons to be continued on April 28th at Lindquist Commons.
Do I have a second?
A second.
Okay, Marion,
Aye.
Paul,
I kind of like the DPW garage, but I guess I'll go with the three of you.
okay,
Vote
George,
yeah.
Aye.
and I might as well. Although I share Paul's concern, but we'll just have to see how things go. So you want to talk about even more importantly, dog licenses, Jackie?
Yeah, so this is.
Jackie, I don't know if you noticed, but yesterday I saw the agenda item. I'm like, oh, I haven't got my dog licenses yet.
I know, this is kind of a strange request. So I reached out to Chris Petrini last week and asked him if the board was able, if I was, or the board was able to make a decision about moving out the March 1st deadline this year. It's due Tuesday. Our bylaw is Tuesday, and that's the reason that, and he emailed me and said, yes, that I have a lot of authority with the licensing and the fees and everything, but that because it's a bylaw, it would be best if you guys voted.
Oh,
So
hold on,
my-
Jackie. There's a lot.
I
of
think
there we go. Go ahead.
I think I took care of it, George.
All right. I just couldn't hear her. So go ahead, Jackie.
Okay, so anyway, so you guys need to vote. And so the reason for this is that we still have a lot of dogs that have not been licensed, and we usually get this crazy surge towards the end. But considering the recent tragic circumstances in town that a lot of the families are dealing with, and the last thing on their mind is licensing their dog, I am very uncomfortable with forcing the $50 penalty on families as of March 1st. So I'm asking if you guys would consider moving out the date to March 15th, or even a week, 2 weeks, or 30 days. I'm just asking to move out the dates to give people more time to license their dog before I start enforcing the $50 fine. I just feel like a lot of people have, their kids are more important right now than licensing their dogs. So that's why I'm asking.
I hear you, Jackie. I'll make a motion to extend it for 30 days.
I would second the motion. Jackie, is this, are you talking about 1 year, or do you want?
Just this year. It's just this year. And I'm gonna email all that, we have a new software, so I'm able to email everyone and say, hey, you haven't licensed your dog, you still have your dog, and by the way, the date's been extended. So, but I didn't want to do any of that until after the board voted on whether or not they would allow me to move the date.
Okay, right. In any case, I second George's motion.
Yeah, only
Yeah.
maybe revision to George's, maybe you want to make it 31 days. You want to make it the end of March, which would be actually a 31-day extension.
Oh, yeah,
It's
make
like
it
March
to March.
31st.
Yeah.
I'll revise my motion to say, change the deadline to March 31st from.
That's
Yep.
the last day.
Yep.
Okay.
All right.
Paul, do you need a quick review?
No, I read what was in the packet, so
Okay,
I support whatever you feel works.
okay.
Yeah.
So
So
we have a
Paul,
motion.
Paul, I made a motion to extend the deadline from March 1st to March 31st.
And I think you seconded it already, Marion, didn't you?
I did.
All right, so Marion,
Aye.
Paul,
Aye.
George,
Aye.
and I as well. Thank you very much, Jackie.
Okay, thank
Wait,
you. Appreciate it.
Before Jackie leaves.
Yes.
I just took a quick look at the general laws. I didn't try to be comprehensive, but there is a law that allows town meetings to be postponed for 30 days at a time with the moderator.
Okay,
It could be. So what another community is doing is they have a bylaw that requires, they have a statute, a charter that says they have to have a meeting on a certain date in April. And they are planning to have the moderator move it over to a date in May, and they're publicizing it as a May town meeting rather than an April town meeting. And it's just technicalities of working with the moderator and getting it postponed. So there is a way to do it if we wanted to do a later town meeting.
okay.
I don't
Okay,
see a reason.
I
I don't
did
see any reason to delay it at this
All
point.
right, I did speak to Mary Wolf about it, and I'm not sure she was aware of that either, but okay.
I don't see a point in delaying our town meeting. So,
Like if there were a COVID surge and.
right, but right now, to be quite honest, the surge has gone, I mean, yeah, if there could be a COVID surge May 24th instead of April 24th. I mean, that's,
Yeah, we did see the graph earlier.
yeah, I mean, right now, you'd want to do something sooner rather than later, so.
That's true.
So, all right, I think we've beaten that one pretty well. Let's go on to capital requests. So I think Sean's got the first, however many it is, 4 or 5 items there. So I think he's going to share his screen. Are you ready, Sean?
I am. What I'm sharing it, I'm queuing up, and actually Chris Owen's gonna jump on. See if I
Yeah,
can
you-
share the right one. I got one of these as a full screen already. Can you see that?
Not yet.
Because I didn't share.
Wait, there you go. I think it's coming up. Give it a minute. There you go. So we've got capital requests.
All right, I got 2 different screens going, so I'm making sure. You're looking at the slideshow?
Correct.
Okay. So this is my list of capital requests. We'll start with the engineering services for Wash Maple. But the list
Okay.
is facilities capital, then MS4, roadway management, tree removal, DPW equipment.
Okay, Sean, you want me to jump in?
Yeah. There we go.
Jeff, is it okay?
Yeah, go ahead, Gino. Is that you?
No,
Nope,
it's Chris.
This is Chris.
Chris.
Oh, go ahead, Chris. I'm sorry. I couldn't because
That's okay.
he's sharing. I
Um,
can't see very many people.
Yeah, that's fine. As you guys must know, the Maple Street intersection is the next project on our complete streets list. This thing's been studied, I don't know, almost 30 years. And most of the latest studies have shown that a roundabout is the safest, best solution for the problem. Under the Complete Streets program, we cannot use any of their funds for engineering studies or designs. So basically, we had thought we would like to have money that was deposited through the special permit from Odessa, because they basically provide about $21,000 a year And that's actually north of 200,000. It's commingled with the general fund. So in other words, for us to use that, we have, and it's under the guidance of the select board, but I think it has to go before town, well, I was told it has to go before town meeting. So basically, we're looking for engineering money for a roundabout for the Maple Street intersection, and that's it. It's funny because I wanted to get traffic safety on board, and even though Brad Van Brunt has moved out of town, in January, I spoke to him and I said, what's going on with traffic safety? Because I'm looking for support for the Maple Street intersection. And he said, you're still talking about that? And I said, we are, because they looked at it back in 2003. That was the last time they said a roundabout is the best thing for this location. So basically, we're looking for engineering money. And that's it.
That's a 17-year roundabout.
Absolutely. I think this is long overdue. This intersection's a problem. My wife has had an accident in this intersection. So I think we've got to move on this. So that makes
roundabouts nationally are really being implemented in many states too.
Right. I don't think I think a light would be a problem. So I think this makes sense. Let's get this moving.
Yeah.
At town meeting, there'll be, we're going to use our 5 minutes. We're going to talk about a little bit of the history of it. And there'll be a little presentation on different roundabouts and why a roundabout is infinitely better in this location than a light. So there will be a presentation.
So Chris?
Yes.
Question? Or
yep.
I want to ask you to make a statement for the voters here about land takings. A roundabout takes up a lot of land. And as I understand it from being on the board for a while, there's a way to do it without doing any land takings. Is that still the case, or are we going to have to be doing land acquisition?
Chris, I can answer.
Oh, sure. Sean, go ahead, please.
So right now, currently, the survey is just about done, and that includes all the property research of the entire area. The preliminary engineering is also happening, which will do that overlay of the land, everything else. We're pretty confident there will be no land taking. We will know that before the advisory hearing. That was the intent of doing the preliminary engineering that's being done right now. That engineering is going to include a definitive answer on any land taking or anything that'll be needed, and a firm cost estimate for the full engineering, as well as, the slides that you would typically need for a public meeting. So those will all be answered. They're not answered today, neither is the full cost. Because you need those questions answered before you can cost out your full engineering and legal.
So just so that we all understand, one of the reasons why a roundabout was not done in the past is because of balking at the cost, not of the construction of the roundabout, but the cost of possible land takings. And there was discussion, because there's a hill there and you come over the hill, you didn't want to hit a roundabout blind and all that kind of discussion. But that I recall one or more people representing that it could be done without land takings. But if you do it without land takings, you're going to have to do it basically in front of the library on where the town hall campus is, and it may have some impact on that beech tree and stuff like that. And for all those reasons, nobody was willing to go forward with it in the past. So what plans we come up with and how it would be configured there, and if it could be done without land takings and preserve the tree and all that good stuff, that would really help.
Let me answer that real simply.
Okay.
Most everything we engineered in the 90s was based on making sure a freight train could make it through an intersection. We don't do that anymore. Every roundabout in the area that you see is about 30% smaller than what they were designing. So when it was last looked at, yeah, it was clipping the corners of the private property. It was halfway up on the lawn of the church. And it was too far into the lawn of the library. Those standards, they threw that book away. And the basis of complete streets, shared use streets, everything you see with bike lanes going through Wellesley and Boston is the exact opposite in engineering. And it plays, Paul, to a lot of the reasons that there was a lot of resistance in the 90s to the plans that MassDOT had, because it was very much not like Sherborn. So I think people are going to be very pleasantly surprised when they see the design that we have underway, and I'm very confident it's going to fit within the right of way of that road.
I was gonna say that would have to be a really big roundabout to affect that beach street.
For
Yes,
what?
it would.
Yeah.
Yes, that would.
But he's right. It was pushed up onto the lawn, and it was clipping the property at 12 Maple Street, and it wasn't a very good looking design that was going to fit. But they've pretty much thrown those designs away for in instances like this. They work good on the Cape, but not here.
Marion has her hand raised.
Right. I think I probably don't have to ask this, but I will just to be sure. Given that this is a complete streets project, Chris, are there bike lanes? Are there pedestrian accommodations to cross the road in that area? And get through?
It is my anticipation that yes, it'll be complete with crosswalks, but that's going to be part of the engineering. But yes. And it's our hope if we can get the engineering done this summer, then Gina will apply October 1st for the complete streets money, and then hopefully we'll be working on it next spring. So that's our anticipation. Are there any other questions?
I don't hear any other ones. I can tell you I've driven all around the UK on the opposite side of the road, and they have roundabouts that are a yellow dot in the middle of the intersection.
And those ones go the wrong way too. So
Yes,
that's a
I
problem.
know. And I was driving with a stick shift and shifting with my left hand too. So I think we've covered that. Is there anything else we want to cover on this one, Sean?
No, we don't. We're not looking for a vote.
Okay. All right. The next one is town buildings and facilities. Or do you want to do them in a different order?
No, let's stay with this order, or I'm going to screw the slides up. So the facilities capital improvements, there's not much to say. We're still just continuing on with our plan to fund the on-site insight recommendations. But one thing that you're going to find consistent, I held the request that I had, from about a month ago of 190. It's probably no secret that we're not buying the same amount of equipment or materials and labor with the money that we had a few months ago. So without doing a lot of work on the analysis, it should be expected that all these numbers are going to climb. If not this year, this was based on a 20-year schedule. So every estimate's wrong at this point. We'll see where it shakes out, but we're currently, just so everyone knows, if you were to look at where we stand on capital, we're a little bit fat on capital. There's a few projects that we're kind of tapping the brakes on and waiting for. They've become almost impossible to do, as simple as just putting gutters on the police station. We waited quite a while to finally do it. We went to put it out to bid, and the best advice I got from a few trusted people in the industry was don't even think about bidding that this fall. There was no materials. You can get the labor to put it up, but you can't buy any materials. So the cost is just prohibitive. So those projects are still queued up. So the money hasn't been spent, but it will be. Roadway management, a little bit of the same situation. We were in the midst of our 5-year plan to try to catch back up. We can go more at length into details later, maybe in the hearing. I have pushed this request up. When I went in front of Capital, I had just used last year's estimate of 350. I think we're gonna need to go to 500 to be able to do the few projects that we have slated. And again, it's probably no secret that most of our costs when we do road work is tied to the price per barrel of oil. So,
So Sean,
yeah,
okay, just make sure you know that the governor has submitted a supplemental appropriation for an extra 100 million on chapter 90 and an extra 100 million on what he calls a pothole fund for road repairs. The 100 million is for chapter 90, increases the pool in chapter 90 from 200 million to 300 million. So it represents a 50% increase. That would be another 125,000 that you would get on chapter 90. And the pothole fund you'd have to apply for, but the 100 million there, that's going to be another, if it's divided according to the chapter 90 formula, would be roughly another 125 there. So that would be like a tentative total of 250,000. I'm mentioning that because we're projecting that that's a popular piece of legislation, projecting that it's going to pass. And those funds will become available to Sherborn.
and that would be great. And I would suggest everyone on this call our Senate and state rep, because the last time we got promised that, remember, it was the beginning of COVID and it fell flat on its face and we got the exact same dollar amount the next year. I hope that comes through. I'd probably still keep this number because we don't have to use this number in a single fiscal. That's the benefit of having the capital. And it's an appropriate phrase to use it as a pothole if anyone's driven through our town or most of our surrounding towns lately. This winter's actually not been that bad for snow, but it's been really bad for potholes lately. So we are still falling behind. Everyone is, and the chapter 90 is interesting that when they go to increase it, they always seem to bring it back to the same number the next year. So we fall further and further behind on chapter 90 because the increase doesn't stick. It never comes close to inflation.
There's going to be a new governor.
Right.
Speaking of potholes, I have just a funny story about this. If you go into Holliston, there's a giant pothole, like right where 126 and 16 meet. And right after you hit it, there's a garage that has a sign out front that says wheel alignment.
That's great.
I like it. All right. That's good, Sean. What do you got next? Stormwater, okay.
So I hadn't touched on this earlier when we did the capital with capital budget because I was waiting to see where a few things would land. As we discussed earlier, we're going to talk more about the Silverwood and Dopping Brook area, Dodds Pond, in the next meeting. The funds for stormwater in part go into some of the, the study that we've done and some of the work and any physical aspects. We did a lot of work this past year on the future plans for phosphorus reduction. That's going to continue. We're still years away from actually spending physical money or money on physical things, but the plans cost a lot of money. AECom does a lot of work. We've done a lot of work in town with Board of Health and Conservation and the groundwater study. Folks have come here for a couple different seminars and been engaged, and that effort's going to increase. So we have to continue funding that. That is an unfunded mandate from the EPA. So that's where this is. There's still money from 2 years ago, but that's being used up, and we don't know exactly what we're going to spend on some of the other remediation efforts.
Anybody have any questions on stormwater? Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry, Sean.
Wait,
And
I
real
just
quick, we're working on,
do have a comment on stormwater.
Oh,
ahead.
all right. Sorry,
Sorry.
Paul.
So at the beginning of the meeting, I said we needed to do something about the water that was flooding private homes, dealing with the Doppingbrook area that Sean mentioned. And I believe we should put some money aside to address it. There are people who are hurting. There are people who have water in their houses and so on. There should be some money here in this budget. Is there, Sean, anything in here that we could use for that purpose?
well, yeah, now, so that was my point. There's still some money from the article 2 years ago, Paul. And that's why I'm coming back with more for this this upcoming town meeting to supplement what we're spending essentially now. We don't need to wait for town meeting. There's still money in there.
Great.
But the expectation is we'll use it and need this money for the upcoming efforts. Just with the general stormwater permit and those efforts.
Yeah, we need to take care of these, our residents.
Right.
Great, thank you.
And then this is a very light year. You'll notice there's no trucks. There is some equipment. I haven't presented this to capital budget yet. This isn't the best year to be finding trucks because they're kind of stuck on lots without chips and not being shipped. But this is a couple pieces of equipment we've been putting on and taking off the list for a couple of years. Pretty hard to do any road work as a highway department without a roller. And we're finally putting our old one to rest. It's about as old as I am, so we got our money's worth out of it.
So I want to make the same point here that I think I've made with the police department, which is we want to go to electric or hybrid vehicles and equipment to the extent that we can, because we are facing this climate change, and the amount of greenhouse gases are coming largely from petroleum products. Is there any way that we can have this vibratory drum roller and trailer be hybrid or electric rather than gasoline?
There might be. I'm not 100% sure. A lot of that stuff got kind of pushed around in the past year or two. That's essentially why I've been waiting too, because the supply chain is really screwed up getting any equipment. I will look at that. I'll commit to looking at that. We did do that with some of the smaller equipment. Unfortunately, the few things we waited on didn't pan out yet. They're still working on trying to make blowers and everything else as usable as gas. But I'm as motivated as anyone. I'm in the only building that's supplied by so much solar energy on the roof that we have to basically pipe it to other buildings. So it would be hugely advantageous to use the electricity at this building. I wish we could plow with electric trucks, but we're not there yet.
Okay, sounds good. I think you've got tree removal. Is that next? There you go.
Right, and this is nothing new. We went a couple of years. We finally used up the remaining funds from a few years ago. I think that one we took out of stabilization funds.
We did.
This year, I would expect we wouldn't do that. We would probably use free cash. But we need to make kind of one more hit at it. There's still a lot of standing dead trees.
Now, these aren't actually capital though, right? Aren't these really more expense items?
Yeah, I mean, that would be for Heidi, but every time we
Yeah.
talked about it, it's pretty hard to capitalize
Yeah, a
something
non-asset.
something you're taking away.
But now, is this another question? We typically budget, if my memory's correct, $50,000 insufficient, obviously. So is this a total of 200,000? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah,
In
what
your
we do
normal-
is what we're trying to do is use this money as chunks to go out to bid with.
Yep.
supplement some of that with the budget in case we're off slightly, but we also need the budget money for the contract tree work, which is pruning.
Yeah.
A lot of the storms, and we seem to be having more each year, where we actually put a tree crew on staff with us during the storm. So we need to cover that expense. So that's what we cover with the budget.
Okay. Great. Marion, you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question about the tree removal. There's such a backlog of trees in the town that it's really, it boggles the mind how many trees we need that are dead and have to come down. And I'm wondering, where is Eversource on that this year? You know, when we were more up to date and when the trees weren't dying as fast as they have been, the planning board would have a tree hearing every year, and Eversource would, you know, would take a whole bunch of the trees and promise to cut them down, and they did. And then we'd fill in the rest from the town. But I haven't heard about an Eversource contribution lately. Do you know what's up with them?
So the town has spent about $350,000 in recent past taking trees down. And to my estimate, Eversource they probably clipped $1 million in the past 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
Remember, we stopped doing tree hearings for dead oak trees. Scenic road or not, there's no reason to have a hearing on a dead tree that's going to come down on the road. So it really hasn't been taking that cycle, and there was never tree hearings on the private property trees.
Right.
So we always focus on the town trees, you know, but in most streets, if it's 5 feet off the road, it could be either. Eversource doesn't distinguish between the two. I mean, they do because they go and ask the private property owner for permission. But whether they're taking a town tree or a private property tree, they don't care. They just don't want it coming down on their asset and taking wires and poles down.
I guess my question wasn't clear enough. I really was just wondering, is Eversource still doing $1 million of tree?
I think they're doing less, but they're still coming in with a pretty healthy list of trees. I'd say they're still outpacing us.
Well, that's good to hear.
But it's gotten to the point, you know, 3 or 4 years ago, it was so bad that we had to just triage which trees were more dangerous. They were, you know, if there was 100 dead ones and you could take 20 down, you had to assess what's the most likely that it's going to fall on somebody. And you know, Eversource does the same thing. They don't really look at the somebody. They say, what's the most likely? Now we're able to assess more often which one is Eversource more likely to take if we call them and point it out to them, so that we can spend the town town resources on a tree that they're not going to take. There's neighborhoods that's all underground. Eversource is never going to go in there and take trees down. Large streets, they're not going to go across the street from the power lines. So we've been able to pinpoint that a little bit better and make sure we're not taking a tree down that otherwise would have been free.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good.
Well, we also, Sean can tell you, we were partnering with them because then we could share Stanley or whoever they're using for crane service and other, you know, things that reduced our cost if we did it in conjunction with them. Okay, and I think that's your last one, if I'm not mistaken.
That's it. That's all I got.
Go get some sleep, Sean. You got a long night.
Yeah, I do.
Now on these are actually gonna be on the warrant. Will we vote on these at the advisory public hearing? Is that what we're thinking?
You're asking me,
select board?
it won't be before that.
Well,
No, I would wait until we see all the capital items. Again, I feel the same way about that as I
Yeah.
do operating, but that's me. I know Paul tends to disagree with me on that, but
I like to give the department heads some feedback as to whether they're on the right track or not.
I think
So
Sean's on
rather-
the right track. I want to see everything else. I mean, if we're spending millions of dollars on a roof at the school, we're gonna have to make some hard decisions, so.
Okay, before we go on, I just wanted to let people know that Eric was able to just join us. He's somewhere in here.
Hey, Eric.
Hi, how's it going?
Checking out, guys. Thanks.
Move him around a little bit.
So on that question you just asked about the voting on this or not, what else is remaining that we're not seeing here and haven't heard before for capital? Not operating, but just capital. Is
Diane,
it
we haven't seen the schools.
schools? Okay.
And there's another part that's missing. If you recall, Eric, you and I are sort of in agreement that some money should be used to offset, some money from ARPA should be used to offset some purchases that we would otherwise be asking the taxpayers to fund. And
Absolutely.
that leads to a discussion of use of ARPA funds. And so there's an agenda item tonight on ARPA funds, and we haven't had that piece yet. So earlier when we had a brief discussion about use of ARPA funds to do some engineering work on one of the streets in town, and the suggestion from our colleagues was we need to have the ARPA discussion first before we talk about using ARPA, any further ARPA funds.
Yep, I agree. And that's why it's on tonight. It is actually purposely placed after the capital, just because it seemed to be congruent that way.
Yeah, but as George mentioned earlier, we got around 1.25 million of ARPA funds. We've used 300+ thousand already, or committed to use. So we have roughly right now around ballpark 950,000 of remaining uncommitted ARPA funds.
That's correct.
So it's not like we're, it's a lot of money, but if you look at what Sean just put out there, that's roughly $1.1 million or so, what he just mentioned. So anyway, we just have to be sensitive to the ARPA funding, I think. And so before we get to that, so you can take over chairing, Eric. We're just about to get to the fire department capital projects.
Okay.
I don't know, Diane, did you have something you were going to say?
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to Eric's question. We do have the schools that are coming forward on the 10th of March, and then that would be it. What was
Okay.
tonight and what's on the 10th of March.
Okay. Very good. Okay. So up next are the two things by Chief Ward. I was kind of handle them together: breathing apparatus as well as utility terrain vehicle. And just as note, we'd actually already seen the police cruiser during the operational budget. So I'd given Chief Galvin the night off on that one there.
Yeah, we removed that from the agenda when we approved the agenda.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I get for being late. And I'm sorry, because I'm on my phone right now, which makes it a little difficult to kind of like see who was raising hands and so on like that. So someone give me a hand. But I'm assuming Chief Ward is in the audience.
He's here. Yes, he is.
I'll turn it over to Chief Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you just mentioned, I have two items, and I have a short PowerPoint of about 5 slides or so. So I was just going to cover the two items at once and then take the PowerPoint down so we can all see each other. And luckily, we don't have any $1 million fire trucks this year, so hopefully.
You're good to share. You're good to share, Zach.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I don't think you can get a fire truck for $1 million anymore.
You're right. A lot of them you can't, Paul. You're absolutely right. So we're in for it for the next one, All right. So thank you. Like I said, we have two capital requests. I think we actually discussed these when we went over the operating budget. I didn't put forth a PowerPoint then, so I'll just go through this quickly. We're looking to replace 8 of our SCBA units. As you may recall, we got a grant 2 summers ago to replace 21 of these units. That grant was worth about $147,000. We put in for all 29. The grant only gave us 21 of them, so we're coming back to the town for the other 8 at a cost of about $65,000. The 8 that we have in service right now, we're going to be replacing. They're in disrepair often, and they're not certified to the same standard as the ones already replaced. new units would have some important safety features and would be the exact same as the other units that we already got from the grant. There's a photo of one on the screen that's actually being worn by one of our firefighters at a fire out of town. And I'm not going to go crazy about some of the safety features, but we're going to have basically bigger air bottles, more warning time for our members to get out of a dangerous situation if they were running low on air, and some better safety features for like things like air consumption while they're working, and any emergency procedures if something were to happen. And again, so that's the air, basically the two slides for the air packs. And then we also put forth a request for a utility terrain vehicle. We own this unit, which is on the screen, which was donated to the department in 2011 by the Sherborn Fire and Rescue Association. And this unit served the town very well, but over the last 12 to 18 months, we've had some significant mechanical issues with it. The DPWs spent considerable time on it, and it's gone to the dealer and things like that. And basically the dealer recommended replacement. The unit that we have is great, and it served us, like I said, it served us very well. It is a little limited in its capabilities compared to newer units. Some of the newer units that are out there are actually designed like for fire service and public safety use. And then one of the other things is that the unit that we have now only has a rescue capability. So basically what we primarily do is we respond into some of our conservation lands, primarily the Rocky Narrows, which is where we go most with this. And we rescue like injured hikers or maybe hikers that have medical emergencies like chest pain or other things like that. So with the new proposed unit, we'd be looking to add a small firefighting capability with that. So if we have fires like deep into the woods, this thing could go in and stop them before they spread. And this is a couple photos of the unit we'd be looking to purchase. And then I just have this slide on some of the funding. So the cost for the vehicle itself runs around $32,000. That would include some big upgrades for us, which include an enclosed cab, a winch so the vehicle could maybe get itself out of a situation if it got stuck in the woods. This unit would have emergency lights and sirens. And would have ample storage for things like first aid supplies and PPE. So that's what our ask for the town would be, that $32,000. The insert for the rescue and the firefighting capability in the back, which is in this photo here, that insert costs about $9,000, the skid unit. And we actually have a commitment from the Sherborn Fire and Rescue Association to purchase that add-on unit. So we're not looking for the full funding from the town. We're only looking for the cost of the vehicle itself. And I'll stop sharing and so we can talk about it.
So if I could, the same comment that I've made with the police chief and with the DPW chief is that we need to go towards hybrid vehicles and electric vehicles to the extent that we can, because of the impact that burning gasoline and diesel and coal and things like that is having on our climate and on our environment. So here, when we're looking at buying a new vehicle, I'm going to urge you, like I urged the other department heads, to look to see if you can do this in a hybrid form or an electric form rather than in a gas form.
I will look into that, and I haven't yet. When you asked Sean that, I kind of knew it was coming, but I'll certainly I will definitely commit to looking into that. So, through the various dealers and manufacturers. Sorry, Art.
Again, if Jeff could help me maybe identify people who have their hand raised.
I don't see any hands up, Eric.
Okay. I agree with Paul's point right there as well, particularly if actually locally, and this probably should go more to the energy committee, if we have solar panels on some of like the fire station, then it makes even more sense to actually make it such as a solar powerless charging it. Although it's not quite the same case nowadays, but it used to be more in like the 80s and 90s. If you're burning fossil fuels 1,000 miles away and then transmitting electricity, it's actually more efficient to burn fossil fuel actually at the actual vehicle. But in this particular case, I think that paradigm's starting to shift either way.
In
Any
this
other
case,
questions about?
in this case, I think it's actually equally important from an environmental standpoint, that, you know, gasoline engines, which have water cooled radiators and everything, could pollute the ground also by leaks or things like that too. So electric vehicle would be less harmful to the terrain because they're going off road.
Yep. Absolutely.
All right.
All right. Yeah. Thank you very much, Zach. Good presentation.
Thank you.
Okay. Does that conclude up the capital items? Is the ARPA next? Sorry, because I have my agenda also on my little phone.
Yes.
Yes,
Yep,
it does.
okay.
Yeah, ARPA's next. Sorry about that.
Yeah, I'm doing this from a hotel room. All right. A hotel with no Wi-Fi, so I'm actually using my cell phone here to was it my 4G to make this work. All right. Without any further ado, as we discussed, I believe 2 select board meetings ago, we're actually going to start looking at the ARPA funds in a very structured manner. We're going to we hired a consultant that's done this for other communities. Look at some of the capital projects that we have planned. Now, also kind of contemporaneous with this, there was kind of an ad hoc group that also got together and had some ideas about some kind of signature projects. Now, to add some structure to that, I wasn't involved really with that group, but I talked to the person who kind of headed that up. That's Dan Snitchell, and has some very good ideas. And what is it? A lot of that, they're grabbing those, they're drawing from the master plan, which has actually been vetted and voted on by town meeting. And that group's going to come to us with actually some certain signature projects that they would like to see on there. And I encourage people who actually, want to consider other projects that aren't on the capital list to engage with that group. And maybe, I don't know, Marianne or Jeff can help with that contact information to kind of vet that together. We're looking for a little bit of a tight time frame here, hopefully within the next 1 or 2 select board meetings to kind of get some kind of list. So the ultimate goal is going to be that, the select board, I always say this, the select board meetings, they're not working meetings. They're not meetings where we kind of vet, they're not meetings where we kind of sort things out, but we have things presented to us. And that way we can kind of make, a rational decision as to, what we recommend, and maybe have go before advisory as well, and that what they recommend, for us to consider between established capital requests that we know are coming up and kind of signature projects as well. And that way I think we can get a reasonable compromise and do what is ultimately in the town's best interest. I also asked the consultant to present an overview of the ARPA, because even though I think a lot of people on this call, a lot of people on the board do understand the status of ARPA funding and what it can be used for, I was surprised at how many people don't understand. As recent as a couple of weeks ago, we've had staff think that it's still only for COVID response. And I think it's good. So if some of this is redundant, I apologize, but I think it's good for us to actually really educate the overall community on the ARPA funds, what it is, what it can be used for, and start vetting out, kind of a menu of projects that, we can start applying to in a very logical, linear manner that this board and advisory can also consider as well. Okay, without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Jen Thompson, the consultant who has prepared a presentation on these ARPA funds. And I guess
Good
Jeff,
evening. Oh, go ahead.
I was wondering so that you can share your screen, that Jeff sets it up that you can share your screen.
Yeah, you can share your screen, Jen. Go
Okay,
ahead.
great. First of all, thank you so much for having me. I think, Eric gave a very good intro in terms of what we'll talk about, and I will go quickly. I mean, I do recognize that you had a pretty, excuse me, full agenda tonight. So I'll go through these slides pretty quickly. I think as you mentioned.
11:30 by the time I'm off this meeting.
Diane, it's okay. I muted her. Don't worry. Go ahead. Sorry, Jen.
That's okay. Like I said, it's getting late, so I'll go quickly through my slides. But as Eric mentioned, there may be some folks that are on here that don't know that much about the ARPA funding. So we'll just give a quick overview. We will. I'll give these slides to Diane. We can put them up on the website. And if the board doesn't already have a copy of the presentation, we'll make sure you get that. So just to tell you a little bit about who we are and what we're managing for you. So Capital Strategic Solutions, we're a local business. We're based out of Marlborough. We're a certified woman-owned business, and we're made up exclusively of former municipal employees. So we've all worked in the municipal sector. We do specialize in grant writing and administration We do public policy and municipal services, community public relations, community engagement, public outreach. We also do some website design and social media outreach. So lately, we spend a lot of time on ARPA. That's what I spend the majority of my time on is ARPA, FEMA, and CARES. And the work that we conduct in Sherborn related to ARPA, as you know, is eligible to be funded through ARPA. So your ARPA local allotment can pay for that. So we are working in quite a few cities and towns. I won't read this whole list for you, but I think we're in 14 cities and towns right now. Some small, some medium, and some pretty large. And the type of assistance that we give relative to ARPA is we do presentations like tonight before city boards and town boards. We also help with project selection and eligibility. We help with public outreach. Some communities want a pretty robust public outreach program. So we do that for some communities. We help you with your procurement and administrative assistance. So these are federal funds. So in addition to your regular state procurement rules, you also have to follow the federal procurement rules. So we help with that. Again, we help with community outreach, including social media and website assistance if folks want that in terms of ARPA projects. And some communities do have us doing that. And the other thing that we help with is helping to interpret and make sure you're aware of the state ARPA funding in addition to your local allocation, as well as other earmarks and federal infrastructure funding that's coming down. I just put a little note here on the bottom that some of the other services we provide to some of the other cities and towns that you saw listed. We do project eligibility review. We've done revenue loss calculations, although that's changed recently, and financial reporting. So we do reporting to the Department of Treasury. But the town of Sherborn already procured those services. You have an excellent firm, CLA, through a separate contract that's managing that for you. So there's no need to duplicate that service. And there's no need for us to do that for Sherborn. You already have that covered. So very briefly, the American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA, was signed into law in March of 2021, and it created the Coronavirus Local Fiscal Recovery Fund, abbreviated CLFRF. The intent of the funds are to support state and local and tribal governments in two ways, both responding to the impacts of COVID-19 and then for efforts to contain COVID-19. As you know, Sherborn was eligible to receive just under 1.3 million in ARPA funds. And again, that's your local allocation. There are also some state ARPA funds that you'll have access to through various programs. Cities and towns have until December 31st, 2024 to obligate those local funds. So we talked a little bit earlier on. Eric mentioned that a lot of folks are very familiar with the common buckets that are used for ARPA funding. And those are your public health and very specific COVID related needs that I think most folks are very familiar with. But there's another section. There are 4 general categories under ARPA where you can spend your funding. In this particular one, it's called the revenue loss and general expense category. So originally there was a temporary rule. It was called the interim final rule that came out. And municipalities had to calculate how much revenue they had lost. And it was based on a formula that calculated how much revenue you lost due to the pandemic. The final rule, which came out in January, changed that and gave municipalities the option to claim up to $10 million, which is the standard allowance in what's called revenue loss. Now, that doesn't mean instead of 1.3 million that Sherborn's receiving, that you're going to receive 10 million. That would be wonderful. But what it does mean is that without any sort of calculation, you can claim that standard allowance, and Sherborn would be eligible to use up until you're up to your full allotment in this category. The reason why that's important is because it gives you a lot of flexibility. So the expenses in this category are any traditional service that's provided by government, with a few exceptions that we'll talk about. But this is really a very general category. So if you don't fit into some of those other categories like public health, that you can use the ARPA funding for. I will just give one little caveat at the end that I always give to my communities, and that's just to be cautious that with this funding, it is a one-time funding source. So you want to be careful with what you select for your projects to make sure that you're not choosing things that are, you know, a reoccurring operating expense that you'll have to fund in the future with this one-time revenue. So I mentioned that there are 4 basic non-allowable uses that are spelled out in the legislation. And you specifically cannot use ARPA funds for these 4 things. You can't use it to deposit money into your pension funds. You cannot use it for payment of debt. You can't use it for any payments of settlements or judgment agreements. And you can't use it to replenish your financial reserves. So you can't take money and put it into, say, your stabilization funds. So those are the very 4 specific uses that you cannot use ARPA funds for. So that very general category that I talked about, the revenue loss general government category, these are just some of the examples that are given in the legislative final rule. So some of the examples of things you could spend that money on are equipment and capital purchases, some of the things that you just discussed when you were going over your capital budget, maintenance and building of infrastructure, including road work, building and facility improvements in your schools and town facilities, cybersecurity, health services, environmental remediation, improvements to your parks and open space, and again, any other traditional government expense, with the exception of those 4 exclusions that we just talked about. And then the 4th category that you can use your ARPA funds for are investments in your infrastructure. So you talked earlier tonight about some of your stormwater needs. That is something that can be covered through ARPA. Broadband and expanding broadband services is also covered under the ARPA funding. Water and sewer projects and their associated road work can also be covered through ARPA. So I think the vice chair was mentioning that you have allocated some of your ARPA funding already. So out of that almost 1.3 million, you've approved these projects already as a board. The Woodland Leland Water Project, some support of your public health department, the COA community assessment, again, additional support for public health. I think you're doing that on a quarterly basis. GIS inventory and septic, AED replacements, and the rapid antigen tests. So in total, that's about 284,000 that you funded, leaving you with just over $1 million that you still have to allocate for ARPA projects. So after your last, I think 2 meetings ago, the town administrator reached out to your department heads and some of your boards and committees to start to get some suggestions for projects. I would say this is a very initial list, and it's just kind of meant to get the list going and to start to get people to think about what type of projects they'd like to propose. I think after we talk tonight, this list will probably grow. But some of the additional projects that have been suggested as we start to compile this list. And I think the first one is one that most of you are already familiar with. I think that was kind of in the works and starting to be a discussion. That's the watershed-based plan for Farm Pond. The health consultant to review and update the Board of Health regulations, funding for a public health nurse, laptops and tablets for the Board of Health, filing cabinets for the Board of Health, landscaping improvements at the library, replacing the septic that's used by the library, some bonuses in premium pay for essential staff was suggested, and then infrastructure and equipment purchases that are already part of your town capital plan. So a few things that we like to mention that communities should consider when you're going through the project selection process. So are there specific projects and priorities? I think some of them you already talked about earlier tonight, that the select board as a body already know that you'd like to use ARPA funding for. And then do any of those align with your capital budget plan and the town's or the town's master plan? Also, some things to consider is once you get your list before you, how do you want to look at them? Some communities choose to kind of use a matrix or a scoring system to evaluate the projects, or do you simply want to just discuss them as a board and look at the different recommendations that you've received? Excuse me. And then another thing you can consider that's allowed through ARPA is whether or not you have an interest in designated funds to nonprofits and businesses that were impacted by the pandemic. If that's something that Sherborn wanted to look at, we do have some other communities that are doing that type of an allocation. So we can certainly help you with program guidelines if that's something that you're looking at. So the next step is to talk about what you've talked about in your last few meetings, is trying to bring this all together in one kind of cohesive way and bring forward a full plan for the board to look at, so that you're not approving projects just kind of piecemeal as they come in. So you discussed at one of your previous select board meetings, kind of that process that you'd like to go through. So we've spelled that out here for you. So the departments and the boards and committees would submit their potential ARPA projects to the town administrator, and us as a consultant will work with Diane to receive all of those. And some of that's already started. You saw that in an initial list. And the first thing we would do is look at those and see which ones are already identified in your master plan, and make sure those are noted so that it's a clear priority that the town of Sherborn has already identified through your master planning process. The next step we would do as your consultant is we'll look at that initial list and determine if there are any state ARPA funds or any other funding source available. The reason that we'd want to do that right from the start, is we wouldn't want you to use your local allocation if there are going to be state funds that would fund that type of a project or purchase. So we'll look at that and see if there's any sort of funding available from a different stream, so that way you're not using up your local allocation. We'll also look at your fiscal year 23 budget requests to identify existing expenses that might be funded through ARPA. I think that was a suggestion made by the board. I think there's a real sense that you want some identification if there are ways that you can save the taxpayers money and either stabilize or lower your tax rate. So we would take a look at those budget requests, keeping in mind that you want to be mindful of the fact that you don't want to fund any sort of reoccurring operating expenses, but we can take a look at your budgets and just kind of look at if there are things that you might be able to pull out and fund through the ARPA funding. We'll also talk to your capital budget committee and get some input on their priorities. They have the 5-year plan that I think was recently submitted to them. So certainly we want their input on what they feel the priority should be in terms of capital projects that might get funded through ARPA. And then we'll consolidate all of that information in those initial steps 1 through 4 into one comprehensive initial document. From that point, I think what you talked about is you have a very good structure in Sherborn in terms of recommendations coming to the select board by both the capital budget committee and advisory committee. So once that initial list was completed, it would be reviewed by capital budget, and any of the projects that are capital projects, they would look at, and if they hadn't already met with departments, because some of them I think will cross with existing capital requests, but if they hadn't, they would discuss the projects with the departments and then make recommendations to the board on those capital items. And I think the same would hold true for advisory. Advisory would look at that revised project list, meet with departments if necessary, and also make recommendations to the select board. After those two things happen, we make that final list, which would show you all the proposed projects, whether or not they're recommended by the various committees, and then that would be presented before the select board. And then ultimately the select board votes to decide which projects will get funded through your local ARPA funds. So that's kind of the process that I think you've spelled out at your previous meetings and how we would proceed based on any questions or further discussion that you might like to have tonight.
All right, are there any questions from the select board initially? And I'm looking at my participant list here.
Maybe if you stop sharing, Jen, we can see the full screen.
I know I'm trying to open my screen at the same time, and it wouldn't.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you for doing that.
Participating.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jen. Absolutely.
Thanks.
Look at
Sorry.
Marianne had her hand up. Marianne, did you have a question?
Yeah, I did. Thank you, Jen. This sounds very much like the kind of process that we were thinking about following. So as you went through the various questions to be decided before you start your work. Basically, that's on the town to do. The steps involved, I see a lot of participation by the town in this, and I know that's what you would want too. By capital, the administrator, people involved in the master plan, advisory. So I'm picking out the things that you would do that maybe would be more difficult for the town to do, to try to, isolate what the added benefit of hiring you is basically. And I could see that to review whether state ARPA funds might be available for certain things that would be useful. Maybe to consolidate the information that you get, which doesn't seem to be too difficult to do. So it's not quite clear to me, not seeking to criticize in any way the work that you guys do. It sounds good, but I'm just wondering, participation of town departments and committees is crucial in this, obviously. So I'm wondering what would your time commitment be, and how much time would you actually be spending in the town, and what would your communication mode with various committees be? I'm looking to see what the value added is of having a consultant on this.
Sure. So I can tell you it really depends on the community a little bit. So some folks need us a lot more than others do. I think Sherborn is a little bit unique right now because you don't have a permanent full-time town administrator. So, Diane is kind of balancing two roles. And I think in your previous meeting, I think Mr. Durensis kind of pointed out, typically, I think if you had a full-time town manager in place, they would be doing a lot of this kind of collecting and, herding the information. So we may have to do that a little bit more for Sherborn. I mean, Diane does a fantastic job, but she's only one person, and I think she's managing two buckets. So Sherborn might need a little bit more help with that, just kind of putting it all together into one, cohesive document. But I don't think you're looking at a lot of hours. Now, with that being said, if Capital Budget Committee is meeting and they need me to be there, I certainly can be there, virtually or in person. I'm fortunate to live pretty close, so that works out nicely too. But I don't think what you're looking at in terms of us as a consultant is a ton of hours or anything like that. I think you just really, from what I can tell, you just kind of need someone to kind of push everything all together, make sure it gets before the board, give Diane some assistance as she needs it. But certainly, I think you're a very well-organized town. I think your boards and your committees function very well. I don't think you need a lot of help with that. Your process that you already go through with capital budget and advisory is a really solid process. So I don't think you need me to come in and tell you how to do that. I think you'll be able to do that pretty easily. So we're really just here to help as little as you need us, and then we will go away. I think, like I said, Sherborn is a little bit unique because you're going through a pretty significant change right now in terms of recruiting a full-time administrator and having someone balancing those two roles. Typically, some communities really the town administrator is kind of leading the charge, and then they'll bounce stuff off of me either by phone or by email and just say, is this something I can do? Is this eligible? What do you think of this matrix? That's typically what my relationship is with the town administrators. But then we have some other communities that are doing a lot of outreach. So they want public surveys. Some of them have individual Arpa committees. So they want us to help with that. But I don't get the sense that that's what you're looking for in Sherborn. I think, like I said, I think you have a really good process already. I think your community is very engaged in this already. So I think you might just need some help along the way to just kind of get it to the finish line, if that makes sense.
I think just to add a little thing before Eric, I think up to now our town finance director has taken on some of that role too. So
Yeah.
it would work with her.
Well, I do want to add, the reason that, I asked this to come on is because I think there's two things I think the consultant adds. One is, pulling the information together, and two, looking at, other state ARPA funding opportunities. That wasn't done at all, and that's certainly as a whole. But also, no one is pulling this together. So we've approved, 7 different projects with absolutely no plan, no list, and no idea. Basically, whoever thought of an idea first came before us, and we said, okay. So I think that the consultant is critical to that, to the point where, at least as long as I'm chair, I'm not going to have anything come before us if it doesn't vet through the consultant. So it's not just someone saying, I want this, I want that. That's what we've seen up until now. We've had no pulling together, no list, no planning on these ARPA funds whatsoever. I think that's massive value added. And I think Jen's giving us too much credit, whereas I think, we haven't had any of that whatsoever, and I think the next critical step in this, in my opinion, I'd like to vet this among the board, is to look at least the next 2 years on the capital plan. We just sat with that. I purposely put this after our FY23 capital request. We just sat through $1 million worth of requests. You know how much we could help our tax rate by offsetting that? Not making up new projects, but offsetting that. I do understand the desire to do signature projects, as these opportunities don't come across too often. And I think it's important that we have this kind of other ad hoc group or another, maybe call it through advisory, come before us with some ideas along those lines. But I mean, we've literally burned through $300,000 without a single plan, with no one pulling this together whatsoever, and just things thrown at us week by week as people come up with whatever favorite ideas they have. So I think it's massive value added, even just pulling it together.
So can I comment on that?
Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
So I have a different view of these ARPA funds. Where I've seen them work very well is what I'm hoping that we do in Sherborn, and that is not lock us into a plan at all, but rather to use the ARPA funds as sort of a relief valve on things that are almost there or need help. And we have a funding source that we don't have to call a town meeting. We don't have to go through the lengthy process of trying to get a reserve fund transfer, or try to get a state grant and go through that process and pray that we get the money in time to do the project. It's a nice safety valve. So I don't want to agree to a plan that spends all that money. Instead, I like the idea and would advocate for the idea that we have this reserve fund of our own that we can spend as we feel it's necessary. These funds are available over 2 or 3 years. I think it's 2024 before we have to spend them. So we've got this money that we can spend where needed. So for example, if there's an emergency somewhere that we need to deal with for citizens or for a municipal building or whatever it is, instead of having to go through the reserve fund process, or instead of having to call a special town meeting, we can, by a vote of the board and 48 hours notice, have the money and have it available and get it done. So I think we're talking about over planning here a little bit. I mean, it's good to have some concepts, and I like the idea of the filtering through the state and all of that stuff. But I think you're taking too harsh a statement when you say you're not going to allow anything to come before the board on an ARPA fund unless it's been cleared through some other process. That's contradicts what ARPA funds is supposed to be all about. At the end of the day, the way this legislation is set up and the way it works is it's our call and not somebody else's call. It's not any other committee in town. It's not outside consultants who may not know the town as well as we do. At the end of the day, it's our call. And so rather than giving that away and diluting that and dispersing it and having to get, other committees acting and delays and all of that, I think we're better served by having the funds available for us to use as we see a need as projects come before us.
No, I'll retract that statement. That was kind of a harsh statement. I'll agree with that. This goes through my frustration of seeing 7 things come before us, which really, frankly, I don't think would have come before us, frankly, if we didn't have the ARPA funds to some degree, maybe. So I'll retract that statement there. But I disagree. We should put aside $1 million for, like, an emergency in the next 2 years. Maybe I think some of it has to be planned. Maybe put a reserve amount, maybe $100,000 or $200,000 set aside, not allocated for reserve. But I think it's not wise to set aside $1 million waiting for some emergency to just happen. And frankly, I think people will find the emergencies if the funds are available. To sit on $1 million, this seems irresponsible. I think you can take a certain amount and you can allocate it to the unexpected. But I think it's just too much money, especially in a town this small. I mean, what's that? Almost like 4 or 5% of our annual budget. Right there, just to essentially wait for something to happen. Is there anyone? Oh,
Yeah, I have my hand up.
Yeah, I'd like to. Yeah, George, go ahead.
I couldn't disagree with Paul more. I'm on Eric's side with this. This is not a select board slush fund. This is we should be considering the other town committees. We can't just cut out advisory and cut out capital budget. I think that's totally irresponsible. There's a reason we have these other committees in town. We're not the end all. Like, we shouldn't, and anybody who comes to us and says, oh, I need this money, I want the advice of these other committees. That's why we have them. And that's why we're talking to these consultants so we can go and see if we have state funds available. I think it's totally irresponsible. I agree with Eric that $1 million just be our little slush fund that we spend on whatever we feel like. That's not responsible as a select board. I like the idea of planning this out, using it for, I'm one thing I do disagree with Eric a little bit is, yes, we should use it to offset the tax rate, but it also could be used in a way for some special projects that we wouldn't necessarily consider if we didn't have the funds available. Like, one idea somebody had passed was like some additional sidewalks, which goes along with the complete streets that's in the master plan. Like, maybe somebody had suggested a sidewalk that continues down Farm Road down to Lake Street so people can walk to Farm Pond. That kind of thing that really promotes the master plan. It's a good capital project. It's good all around for the town. But this should not just sit and be a slush fund. We've already spent $280,000 and that's not what it's meant for. And I think that's a bad idea.
So if I could respond to that, I
go ahead.
wasn't saying that all the money should be put aside in a quote slush fund at all. No, I'm suggesting that we spend it. We've spent roughly a third of it or a quarter of it already. And I think every one of those expenses I support, and I think they were good and wise choices. And I think we would continue to spend wisely as we go forward. Should we consider projects like sidewalks? Absolutely. Should we consider things like what's implementing that would implement the master plan? Absolutely. Those are all no-brainers. All I'm saying is, I don't think we need to be so organized and so regimented that we've lost the flexibility that the ARPA funds are intended to provide to the community.
All right, I'd like to hear from Jeff, because he patiently has his hand up.
Yeah, no, it was good. George mainly stole my points because I agree with pretty much everything George was saying. I guess I think it's a balance of top down and bottom up. We don't necessarily want to be making the direction, but we might want to do some of these special projects that might not come up in our traditional budgeting process. So an example, along with the one, I like the complete streets analogy is great. Daryl Beardsley actually had an idea the other day where we maybe digitize all the town building records and property records, so they're no longer paper files, which would save costs in the long run and make it more efficient. So who knows if that's a good project, but I'd like to see a balance between, reducing taxes and strategic things that you know, if you think of what people remember 5 years from now, they're not going to remember that you got this, you know, front end loader with ARPA funds. They're going to remember that you can now walk from Abbey Road all the way up to Frosty's and have ice cream or something. So I would like some things that are strategic, and things that wouldn't normally occur perhaps without ARPA funds. And it's not that they're not economically justifiable, but that they're sort of, you know, a recognition that ARPA is a special opportunity to do things that can benefit the community in qualitative in addition to quantitative ways, I guess I'd say. So I think that we'll get there. And I think we're sort of in violent agreement here for the most part, because as Jen said, we don't have to obligate or confirm the funding until the end of 2024. And so there may be something that we want to consider later on. I don't view it as a slush fund, but maybe we don't want to decide everything right now, and maybe some projects will come up that we would have wished we had the money to do a year from now. So it could be that it's not a slush fund, but it's a recognition that we need to be strategic in how we use the ARPA funds. Thank you.
And I agree with that. I think that maybe a certain amount doesn't get allocated, but to have this blank of $1 million, and it kind of struck me as like whoever came to the board first. You know what I'm trying to say?
No, that's
just like, you know, and I don't want to marginalize. I do think they're good requests. I do.
Yeah.
Necessary. But I think like already you're hearing rumblings. Like I guess you know, employees are going to start requesting, you know, sort of their stipends and so on, and maybe it has good merit to it. But we have to actually, like, you know, it can't just be first to the table. It has to have a lease plan. In my opinion, I'm just going to make up a number. I think 80% of it should be planned. I think at least $800,000 should at least have some kind of plan. We can always change it, but at least we have something down there. And then, you know, we have 200,000 that can be used for things that they come up or something along those lines. I mean, I'm just making that up.
Yeah.
Anyway, is there anyone else?
Marion
has her hand up.
Marion, yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think Eric, you put it well. That would be a good balance, and that requires some sort of plan. And I would just remind everybody, you don't really need reminding from me, but this is only, well, it's a few days less than 2 years. We have to get this money allocated, and you know what? It's not that much money, so I think we do need to spend it wisely if it's going to have any impact on the long-term quality of health, quality of life in the town. You know, we do have to be a little bit careful about what we choose and not just fritter it away. And that brings up the deadline concept. You know, many of us are used to having a hard deadline for something, and we count back from that. Well, if our hard deadline is December 31st, 2024, that means to vet projects, to figure out how much they cost, to allocate the funds. We need to have the kind of deadline, I would say, that brings projects out of the woodwork in a way that they wouldn't before, because people don't sit down and work a project through to the point where they can put it down on paper and estimate how much it will cost, et cetera, et cetera. We have a lot of kind of off the cuff brainstorming, but it takes more than that to put in a project proposal. So I think we do need to think about the timeline, and having some organization to that is very helpful. And I can see that Jennifer or one of her colleagues might be useful in this, to sort of keep everybody on track, basically.
Yes, I see Michael Lesser has his hand raised.
Hi, Michael Lesser, 54 Fire Street. Speaking just as a resident. I guess I'm partially just sort of shaping. I feel a little more inclined to the view that, whereas I think that maybe some of the money should be left a little less planned, possibly to give some fallback in a year or so, but there is a deadline for that. But as an overall principle, I mean, I'm just coming to this tonight, that I'm actually, the original sense of this money was for things that were, there was a crisis or extra costs that we had to bear due to the pandemic and all of what we're dealing with COVID. And I think that in a sense, those kind of expenses, to the extent that some of them already been dealt with, should have some priority on this. But after that, I guess I'm leaning less against this kind of like, oh, it's a special thing, we could do something out of the ordinary. I would actually rather prefer that this just is funding, the majority of it goes to fund projects that just go through the regular vetting of what we want to do in town and what we have for our capital budgets and other kind of processes that I don't see this as a way beyond dealing with pandemic related extra expenses, that it should be viewed to do something out of the ordinary. And if there's a sidewalk that we want to Farm Pond, it should come up on its own merit. I don't see that this is the place to say, oh, wow, this is where we can do that. I mean, I could see lots of reasons to want to do that for other things. But so I'm leaning, my sense at the moment is that it's not used for that kind of special stuff beyond pandemic and health issues, and that we use it to fund some of the regular capital expenditures and other things that we have that makes sense.
All right, very good. Of course, I like it because you agree with me. But does anyone else have any questions? And again, I can just see my, I can't see people's screens. I can only see the my participant list.
I don't see any hands up, Eric. I'm watching.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you very much again, Jen, and thank you, Diane, for working on this. If I can propose, I think maybe next steps is going to be to have Diane and through the use of the consultant to start collecting at least our capital projects the next couple of years, and to work with Dan Sitchell on who has that group. I'll call it through advisory for lack of a better term. It's not it's not a group of advisory, but kind of has members of advisory on it. Who have looking at some signature projects as well and other projects. And if people have ideas, if I see Dan's on the call, I'm going to probably volunteer him to collect people's ideas as they come in. I don't know. Is there any other thoughts from the board? And have something maybe in the next meeting or two before us?
Well, I guess what I would say is typically what happens when we do the advisory public hearing, they vote on all the different projects, and then usually right after the public hearing, they decide how they're going to fund the ones that they're recommending the positive action on. So they decide, we used to use free cash, we don't use it very much anymore. So they decide between expense funding versus debt financing. So if we have ones in this year's capital budget, we would probably need to do it sooner, because then when we have it on the warrant, we recommend how it be funded.
That's a very good point. That's a very good point.
Does that make sense, George? You can
Yeah.
say it better than I can, but that's where we decide not only which ones advisory is going to recommend positive action on, but how they're proposing it be funded.
And when is that meeting?
March 26th is the advisory public hearing, and it's not that much, usually like maybe the end of March, maybe early April, they have to write up what is the write-up for the full warrant for all town meeting, and that includes their proposal of how each item that they're recommending is funded.
And a lot of times it's discussed at the public hearing where funding's going to come from.
Yeah,
and we may have times with the finance director of what's available and yada yada yada.
And we actually we got it early this year, I think, George. We already have our free cash certified, I think, at pretty high level.
No, I saw that.
Yeah. So sometimes we've been up against the wire and haven't had that number either, I think.
And so at best we have 1 or 2 meetings. We have a meeting on 10th and the 24th.
Yeah.
Probably before that. So I asked Jen and Diane, do you think you can vet some of the next couple of years of capital projects just to kind of, have something at least presented before, before this group, before it goes anywhere, just on the capital side of things?
Yeah. Meet next week, Jen, to go over that?
We can, and I think, I would recommend, I think someone mentioned Deb too, your interim finance director. I think she's key in this because she's kind of been handling them as they go in. She's got a really good handle on the capital requests. So I think, the three of us have already talked, and I think, we can get together next week and start to pull everything together for you.
And putting him on the spot, Dan, do you think you could vet some ideas on signature projects?
You're muted, Dan.
Dan, we can't hear you.
I can't see anyone.
Yeah, he's.
Yeah,
You're
it
good
says
now.
you're unmuted, but we can't hear you.
He's nodding. You can just nod your head. Give a thumbs up.
No, no, we can hear you.
Okay. Sorry about that. Zoom defaulting to the wrong microphone. So I would be happy to collect project ideas. I do think, given the timeline of if this is meant to happen in the next couple of weeks, they will be kind of vision ideas rather than concrete proposals with numbers, because I think in a, say, 2-week period for the sorts of projects that people are considering, it will be challenging to have a definitive number of this is a project that would be $47,000. So I think it would be possible to collect a list of kind of projects and ideas, but I think there'll be some, it would take more than a week or two to put numbers on them and say, here's how much it's going to be.
Yeah, I didn't mean to imply that either, Dan. What I was saying was that we have a capital budgets already on the warrant. And so all I'm suggesting is for those ones, if there are any of those that we want to consider for ARPA, we would do that. I don't think we need to have the full ARPA plan together, but we have to decide on the ones that are on the warrant.
Right, Steve Tsai might want to jump in on this as well. I understand the distinction you were making, Jeff. I was just saying in terms of collecting ideas on signature projects, I think it'd be challenging to have hard numbers within a couple of weeks.
Yeah, and to be honest, it is true that we don't really need that, and that was more just a conceptual idea, just kind of see, I guess, for lack of a better term, what the capital ARPA request would be competing against. You know what I mean? That's kind of all it is. Again, an idea that don't really need that super vetted. Steve I just made a comment, which is true, that they could actually vote on them, could still actually allocate ARPA funds to one of them. All it will do is affect you. I guess it'll affect your debt service and how that affects the operating budget. That's really the main thing that would do, is whether we use ARPA funds on a FY23 capital request or not. So maybe it's not. Maybe we assume to have kind of a deadline for the meeting on the 24th with kind of an initial vetting of ideas, something like that, and kind of do the best we can with that.
So just don't need to be in a hurry either. We've got till, I mean, there's no reason to rush this in the next month. We've got.
No,
That's the point I was going to make, was that we've got, as I understand, we were talking about capital projects. We actually have 3 years of town meetings. And if you take $1 million divided by 3, that's like 330,000 per year that can be used to offset capital expenditures over a 3-year period. That's the town meeting in 2022, the town meeting in 2023, and the town meeting in 2024. And so if we look at this year's capital projects, you might consider limiting the amount of ARPA funds used for capital projects this year to 330,000. That way you have 330,000 for the next year, and you have 330,000 for the third year, rather than using up all ARPA funds in 1 year, because we happen to have capital projects that total the full $1 million.
I can see splitting between 2 town meetings, but taking it to town meeting 24 seems a little bit cutting it close with the deadline of the use of the funds. But I see your point. I think it's a valid point. At least 2 years of funds. And that's why I did want to look at 2-year capital plan for the initial list. All right.
Marion has her hand up, Eric.
Oh, yeah, go ahead, Marion.
Yeah, I just want to hear, and I would want the members of other boards and committees and groups to hear, to whom do they send a really good idea for a project? It can be one that we're already contemplating or one that we're not, but I think we need to open this up a little bit beyond what's already been proposed in capital projects or will be, just to, expand our mind a little bit. And we may or may not fund them, but to whom, people need to know, to whom do they send their
So,
project?
it's funny, I initially kind of threw Dan out there, but that's not really fair, especially since that's not really an official committee. I think the town administrator, sorry, Dan, I'm gonna kind of volunteer you. I think the town administrator, that's the clearinghouse for a lot of this stuff. That's a single source of knowledge as to what's being pulled together. I think that's it. And then she can decide whether it goes to Dan, to this board, to capital, or whatever else, she can make that decision how it's distributed. And that's a single point of clearinghouse. Is that okay, Diane?
Sure, no problem.
Okay.
I think one reason to add on to Marion's point is that, in my example that Daryl gave of maybe digitizing the town building records, it wouldn't come from one department. So it would be a little bit of an integration of projects, because that would be Board of Health, the planning board, the inspectors. So there may be projects that cross multiple typical budgeting groups.
So if I could, one of the things that I think we already have are long-term, like 5-year plans, capital plans. Doesn't our capital program committee actually prepare projections going forward for different things over a 3-year or a 5-year period? And I think I've seen budgets that look at multiple years in the past and multiple years in the future. So I think that somewhere there are documents that indicate projects, we're going to get like 2 cruisers this year, 2 cruisers next year, cruiser the 3rd year. There's stuff out there.
Capital budget does that.
We have a 5-year capital plan.
So why don't we take that 5-year capital plan and look at those projects too, not just the ones on the current list, and not those that we're asking everybody to come up with. Let's look at what's already, we already know we're going to have to incur.
That's exactly what I've been saying. I've been saying go 2 years out in the 5-year plan, just because my knowledge of 5-year plans, 3, 4, and 5 are always fuzzy, and 2 years is consistent with that. But that's what I've been saying from the beginning of this agenda item. That should be the backbone of it, in my opinion. That's bottom line of that.
My concern about that approach is that it rules out projects that could really improve the quality of life in Sherborn, like, sidewalk connections in town center or to Farm Pond or whatever. So I just don't want to see that opportunity lost completely by sticking only to the capital budget.
Well, that's why what I want to come before the board next is a combination of that list of those, I'm calling it 2-year, call it whatever you want, the capital projects anyway, and the signature projects, and then would vet them essentially with advisory and so on like that. That's what I've been saying, from the beginning there. I will say though, and maybe this is being a little critical, that if something is important, like a sidewalk connection, it should kind of be on the capital plan. Anyway, you know what I'm trying to say? And that's kind of my whole point with this whole thing, where it's kind of like, if the town was going to spend money on, I'm not just looking to offset taxes and so on like that, but that should be on the plan of certain things if they're important enough. Like someone talked about the design for the roundabout of Maple and Washington. Makes sense. It should be on the capital plan, on the 5-year capital plan anyway. We all agree. We all know it's dangerous. Wasn't there a bad accident there just a few weeks ago, I think?
Yeah.
And, that's something where, in my opinion, should be on. If it's not, then I think we have other issues. Then we can take those signature projects, we can take our capital projects anyway, look at them. But if you see some important things on that signature project list that aren't on the capital list, we have kind of other issues. I think, that should be on it, but that's just whatever.
I agree.
All right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, the participant list. I don't see any other hands. Yeah, so I won't hold the deadline of the 24th, but maybe make that a loose target or something like that to come before. We'll see how full the agenda is. And a loose target of the 24th to at least, start looking at the capital projects, work with Dan's group to kind of see if there's some kind of initial list. And we'll take a look at it, maybe a week before the 24th, just kind of see where you stand and see how the agenda looks then, just to have some kind of deadline and keep things moving. And if, if it's not ready, then we'll just, wait another meeting.
Makes sense.
Okay.
The next item, Eric, is a review of the amended select board budget.
Yeah, I had requested to put this on. I looked through it. It's exact. I just wanted to make sure we revisited after we talked about it because it is our budget. And I
Yep.
think it looks exactly as we wanted it to. So I think this could be a quick agenda item. I don't think there's any issues here.
Okay, so it sounds like we're done with the ARPA funding presentation. I'll thank Jen again. I'll thank Diane again. I think we have a good path moving forward there. So officially, let's start agenda item number 8. Was there anything specific, or you think, or
No. I just wanted to review it again, just to make sure. We had asked for changes to it, so I wanted to see those changes before, after they happened, and they were exactly as planned. So it is our budget, so we need to make sure that it reflects what we discussed the last time, and it does.
Okay, very good. Does any other board member, so I'm looking at the agenda, have any questions about that? Okay, what's up next? Is the select board reports?
Yes.
Okay, any actually I'll do town administrator first. Any town administrator reports?
Diane, you're muted.
I don't have anything.
Okay.
I think I said enough tonight.
It sounds like a meeting. I gotta check the beginning of the recording. How about select board reports?
I have one thing I just want to mention. I
Please.
just wanted to comment on, it's been a tough couple of weeks, week and a half in the Sherborn community with the loss of a high school senior. And I just want to commend the community for how well they came together to support the family. And it's been, Sherborn is a special place, and it really, people come together to support families in need. And we hope that we don't have to go through too many of these events again.
All said. Well said. That's been hard, absolutely.
And my heart goes out to the Bingham family. That I think all of us feel the same way.
Yeah, we all agree. Thank you for saying that, George.
Anyone else from the select board? Okay, what's up next? Executive session?
Yes.
Okay,
So we would need to vote to go to executive session.
all right.
So I move that
as
we,
chair-
you chair.
Oh,
you-
actually,
yeah,
you know what? You move actually, Jeff, because I think you're gonna be chairing this. So actually, it's appropriate that the chair has to move and declare that an executive session is warranted. So feel free. Go ahead.
Correct. That was my thinking. So I do declare as read by the town administrator that we enter executive session to discuss item 3 on the agenda. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor? Are you going to vote, Eric, or no? To
No,
go to
I'll
executive session?
abstain. Put me down as
Okay,
abstain.
all in favor, Marion,
Aye.
Paul,
Aye.
and George?
Hi.
I'm abstaining from going executive, but I'm voting for ending the open.
Okay.
Good night, Eric.
We'll take you up on that. So let me turn off the recording and get the meeting set here.